The elder named Gordon Vane did not look at Nara when he said her name. He looked at the floor. That was the first thing she noticed. A man who had watched her grow up, who had eaten at her father's table twice a year for as long as she could remember, stood in the middle of the pack hall with his hands folded behind his back, and announced her fate to the mud-colored floorboards beneath his feet. She was 23 years old, and she had nothing that anyone in Crescent Ridge had ever wanted. No mate, no bond, no family name worth protecting, not since her father's disgrace 3 years ago stripped that away too. She had a small room at the back of the third-tier housing block, a job sorting grain records in the storehouse, and a habit of saying things that made the elders uncomfortable at community meetings. That was her full inventory. That was everything she owned. Gordon Vane told the floorboards that the pack had decided to send a tribute to the Alpha King of Iron Hollow. He said tribute, the way a man says a word that has a worse word hiding behind it. The room was full of people. Every one of them was very still. Nara stood near the back wall, and she felt the moment the weight of the room shifted. Not all at once, but the way a scale tips when the last small stone is placed. Slowly, then completely. No one turned to look at her. That was the second thing she noticed. In a room full of people who already knew, not one person turned to look at the girl they were giving away. She had exactly 4 hours to pack. One of the younger pack assistants, a boy named Len who could not have been older than 17, came to her room with a cloth bag and told her she was allowed to bring personal items up to what she could carry. He said it carefully, like he was reading from a script. She took the bag from him without a word, and he left immediately, which told her that his instructions included not lingering. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment. The room was small, and the walls were thin, and she could hear the wind coming off the hills outside, which she had always liked. She had lived in worse places. She had lived in this one long enough that she knew every sound it made in every kind of weather. That was all a home really was, she had decided years ago. A collection of sounds you knew. She was not going to think about that right now. She packed her warmest coat, the one with the collar she had mended twice. She packed 2 changes of clothes, and the flat boots that had not yet worn through. She packed the small book of plant medicines her mother had left behind, which no one had ever asked about, and which she had therefore managed to keep. She packed the folding knife she kept under her mattress, not because she thought it would save her from an Alpha King, but because leaving it felt like surrendering something on purpose, and she was not prepared to do that. At the bottom of the bag she found a space. She thought about what else she owned. The answer was, not much else. She folded a spare pair of wool socks into the space, and called it done. Gordon Vane came back 1 hour before departure. He brought 3 other elders with him, which was more witnesses than her packing required. He also brought a bundle of dried herbs tied with yellow cord, and told her they were for good fortune on the journey. He held them out with both hands, like they meant something. She took them. She walked to the door. She dropped them in the mud outside. None of the elders said a word. The cart that took her north was driven by a pack driver named Owen, who had the particular skill of never speaking and never making the silence feel personal. He kept his eyes on the road. She kept her eyes on the terrain, counting the turns, mapping what she could. The hills of Crescent Ridge gave way to flatland, gave way to something older and darker, a stretch of forest that did not have a name on any pack map she had ever seen, which meant either no one had bothered to name it, or no one who went in had come back to do it. She decided not to ask Owen which. By midday the forest was behind them, and the land turned gray and chalky, and by evening, the walls of Iron Hollow were visible against the low winter sky. She had expected something dramatic, towers, banners, guards in formation. What she saw instead was a fortress that looked as though it had been built to outlast everything around it, without caring much about being looked at. The walls were high and rough cut, and the color of old iron. There were guards at the gate, but they moved aside when Owen's cart approached with the efficiency of people who had been told exactly what to arrive and had decided not to make it complicated. The gate closed behind her. Owen handed her bag down and left without waiting. She stood in the outer courtyard with her bag on her shoulder and the cold air settling against her face, and she did what she always did when she arrived somewhere new and uncertain. She counted the exits. There were 3 she could see. One through the main gate, which was now closed. One narrow passage to the left that seemed to lead to a service yard. One door to the right that was ajar and had low yellow light behind it. She filed all 3 away and turned to face the woman who had appeared without making a sound. The woman was lean and long-faced, and perhaps 45, with dark hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked uncomfortable. She was dressed plainly. She held a small book in one hand and a pen in the other, and she looked at Nara the way an accountant looks at a new line in a ledger, not unkindly, just clinically. "Nara Fen," the woman said, not a question. "Yes, I am Senna. I manage the household and the schedule, and most things that require managing." She made a small mark in her book. "Your room is on the second corridor, east wing. It is not large, but it is warm. Meals are at 6, and at noon, and at 7. You are expected to be present unless otherwise informed." Expected by whom? Senna paused. Not a long pause, a brief recalibration. "By the household routine," she said. "The Alpha King does not take meals with the household." "When do I meet him?" "When he decides." Senna closed the book. "Come." Nara followed. She noted the second corridor as they passed through it. She noted the location of the stairwells and the direction the guards walked their rounds. She noted that the servants they passed did not raise their eyes, which could mean strict protocol or could mean fear, and that the difference between those two things was important, and she did not yet know which this was. Her room was, as Senna had said, small. A bed, a chair, a table, a window that looked out onto an inner courtyard, a fireplace with a small fire already burning. On the table was a plate of bread and cold meat, which she ate sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, still wearing her coat, because eating in a new place always felt safer close to the ground. After she ate, she examined the door. There was a lock, but it was on the outside only, which told her something about what kind of guest she was expected to be. She examined the window, too small and too high off the ground below to be useful, but not impossible in a genuine emergency. Then she moved the chair to the door. The chair was not heavy enough to stop anyone serious, but it was heavy enough to make a sound if the door opened, and a sound was often the most important thing. She sat on the edge of the bed and took out the folding knife and set it on the mattress beside her knee and did not put it away. She did not sleep. By the first hour of morning she had accepted that she was not going to sleep. She sat with her back against the headboard and the fire dying slowly in the grate, and she did the thing she had trained herself to do during the 2 years after her father's fall, when sleep was also regularly unavailable. She thought in lists. What she knew: she was inside a fortress, run by a man called the Mad Alpha King of Iron Hollow, who was feared by every pack within 3 days' ride. She had been sent here by her own pack, not as a tribute in any ceremonial sense, but as a disposal. This she understood without needing the words said to her directly, the way you understand rain before it arrives, by the way the air changes. She had no allies. She had no bond. She had a folding knife, a book of plant medicines, and a memory that had never once let her down. What she did not know, what he actually wanted, what had made him demand tribute in the first place, what mad actually meant in his case, and who had decided it, whether the people inside these walls were afraid of him specifically, or afraid of something else that his rule had failed to stop. She had grown up hearing the stories about Calum Voss, the way all the packs told them, in short, sharp bursts, always with someone looking over their shoulder first. He had taken Iron Hollow's leadership 6 years ago when his father died, and within 2 years the pack had closed its borders. He had refused 3 alliance marriages. He had ended a trade route to the western packs without explanation. He had, on one occasion that had made it into pack gossip with the weight of fact, sent back a formal diplomatic envoy from the Halker pack with a message written in 4 words on plain paper: "Do not come again." The Halker pack did not come again. But madness, she kept turning the word over. Madness meant different things depending on who was speaking. To an elder council, madness was often just refusal. A man who would not be managed, who would not perform the rituals of power in the expected way, who looked at the room and said the thing no one wanted said. That man got called mad with great efficiency, and the word stuck, because it was easier than engaging with what he had actually said. She was not making excuses for him. She had not met him. She was simply noting that the people who had sent her here were the same people who had looked at the floor when they said her name, and their version of events had earned a certain degree of examination. When the gray light of morning came through the window, she got up, washed her face in the cold basin in the corner, smoothed her coat, and braided her hair. She folded the knife back into her pocket. She moved the chair away from the door. She was not going to spend her time here hiding in a room. She had done enough of that in Crescent Ridge. She found the dining hall at 6 o'clock by following two servants who moved with the automatic confidence of people going to the same place they always went. The hall was long and plain, and there were perhaps 30 people eating in near silence. She took a seat at the end of one of the lower tables and filled her plate and ate without rushing. A few people looked at her. No one spoke to her. That was fine. She was looking at them too. She was assessing faces. She was an exceptionally good reader of faces. It was a thing you became when you grew up in a house where your father's mood determined everything, and there was no early warning system except expression. She could read the texture of fear on a face, the particular shape of it that meant, I am afraid of the person in charge, versus, I am afraid of the situation. She could read the difference between someone who kept their eyes down because they had been trained to, and someone who kept them down because they were protecting something. In that dining hall she saw both kinds, more of the first than the second, which was not what she expected. And scattered among both kinds, she saw something she had not expected at all. 3, maybe 4 faces that carried neither variety. People who were simply eating their breakfast with the unremarkable peace of people who were exactly where they intended to be. She stored that away. Senna found her afterward in the corridor and told her the morning hours were unscheduled. She could walk the inner grounds. She could use the east reading room. She was asked not to go into the northern wing or the lower storage levels without escort. What happens in the northern wing? Nara asked. Senna looked at her. It is where the Alpha King works, she said. He does not welcome disruption. What kind of work? Another brief pause. The kind that keeps the pack functioning, Senna said. That is all you need to know. Nara nodded and thanked her and walked in the direction of the east reading room, and then, when she was certain Senna had turned the other way, she changed direction and went to look at the northern wing from the corridor junction, just to see what it looked like from the outside. It looked like every other part of the fortress. Stone walls, torches in brackets, a guard at the far end who glanced up and then looked away without moving toward her, which meant she was within the acceptable boundary. She noted where the boundary was and went to the reading room. It was a better room than she expected. Shelves from floor to ceiling on 3 walls, a long table in the center, good morning light coming through 2 tall windows. She ran her fingers along the spines without pulling anything out. She was reading the collection, not the books. What a library held was a record of what someone thought was worth keeping. The shelves here held histories, maps, a great deal of pack law and territorial documentation, a section of medical texts, a section on animal behavior and ecology, and, in the far corner, a row of books that had clearly been handled more than the others because their spines were faded and their bindings soft. She pulled one of the worn ones out. It was a collection of philosophical arguments about leadership, the responsibilities of an alpha, the ethics of force, the question of when silence is its own kind of lie. The margins were full of handwriting. Small, precise, dense. Not notes for memory. Arguments. Whoever had been reading this book had been fighting with it, line by line. She put it back carefully. She took down a second one. Same handwriting in the margins. A third. Same. She stood in the reading room with the particular feeling of having found out something about someone who did not know they had been found, and she thought about what kind of man spent his nights fighting with books about the ethics of power, and whether that man and the man the stories described were the same person. The fire in the grate crackled. Outside, wind moved across the inner courtyard. On the 4th day, she had begun counting in days because it gave the time a shape. Senna came to her room in the mid-morning and told her she was summoned. Nara set down the grain inventory book she had borrowed from the reading room. She had been making notes in the margins of her own, small ones, calculations about the storage patterns she could read from the numbers, and she stood up and smoothed her coat. Now, she said. Now, Senna said. She followed Senna through the northern corridor junction and past the guard, who did not look up, and through a door she had not previously been through, into a room that was large and low-ceilinged and lined with maps. Maps on the walls, maps on the table, maps rolled and stacked in a corner like a collection of things too important to put away. A fire was burning on the far side. There were 2 chairs near the fire, angled toward each other, and a low table between them with a cup on it. Only 1 cup. So she was not expected to stay long, or to drink. Calum Voss was standing at the main table with his back to the door. He was taller than she had imagined, though she had not spent time imagining, and broad across the shoulders in the way of someone who had not worked to be that way, but simply was. He was not in armor. He was dressed simply, in dark wool, with the sleeves pushed back, because he had apparently been writing. He had dark hair, overlong, pushed back from his face, with the carelessness of someone who noticed it when it bothered him. He turned when they entered, and she saw his face. It was not the face of a monster, it was the face of a man who had learned to keep the surface very still. She recognized it, because she had been practicing the same expression for 3 years. The stillness was not absence, it was management. Behind it something was always moving, always calculating. You could see it in the eyes, if you knew what to look for. His eyes were gray-green, and they moved over her once, quickly, with the economy of a person who reads a room and moves on. Not dismissive, efficient. He dismissed Senna with a look. He did not invite Nara to sit. He did not, for a long moment, speak at all. He looked at her with the steady attention of someone who was deciding something, and she looked back at him with the steady attention of someone who was not going to look away first. He spoke. "Did they tell you," he said, "why they chose you specifically?" His voice was quieter than she expected. Not soft. There was something underneath it that was the opposite of soft, but low, controlled, the kind of voice that did not need to raise itself. She took a breath. "No," she said. "They told me I was chosen. They didn't say why." He looked at her for a moment longer. Something moved in his face. Not much, not obviously, but she caught it because she was watching for exactly that. A small shift, at the corners of his eyes, at the line of his jaw. Something that might have been recognition. Something that might have been anger. It was gone, before she could be certain what it was. "That is all," he said. She stood there for a half-second longer than necessary, not because she was hesitating, but because she wanted him to know she was leaving, because the conversation was over, not because she was frightened. Then she turned and walked out. Senna was in the corridor, waiting to guide her back. They walked in silence for a moment before Nara spoke. "He didn't offer me a seat," she said. "He rarely offers anyone a seat," Senna said. "Does he usually dismiss people that quickly?" "Quicker," Senna said, which was not an answer, but was information. Nara went back to her room and sat down and thought about one question. Not about the fortress. Not about Iron Hollow or what would happen next, or whether she would find a way out. She thought about the look on his face when she said no. What she had seen there, in that half-second before it disappeared behind the stillness, was not what she expected. It was not pleasure. It was not possession or satisfaction at having received what he demanded. It looked, if she was going to be precise about it, like someone confirming something they had suspected and hoped was not true. She turned it over for a long time. Outside her window, the inner courtyard was quiet. A single torch burned against the far wall. The wind moved through the space between the stones and made the low, even sound she was beginning to recognize as this place's particular voice. She did not sleep again that night, but this time, the reason was different. This time she lay awake because something had changed, and she could feel it without yet being able to name it, the way you feel a turn in the weather before the sky shows you anything. Something in the air of Iron Hollow had shifted, very slightly, in the moment between his question and her answer. She was going to have to figure out what it was. She pressed her hands flat against the mattress and stared at the ceiling, and began, very carefully, to think. The second morning in Iron Hollow, Nara woke before the light came. She did not need to be told what day it was, or what she was doing there, or who she was. Those were things that came back fast, before full consciousness, like stones settling in water. She was in a fortress run by a man who frightened half the territory. She was there because her own people had put her there. She had her coat, her knife, her book of remedies, and a mind that was already working even before she sat up. She sat up. The fire in her room had burned down to coals. She added 2 pieces of wood from the stack by the wall, just enough to take the edge off the morning cold. And then she washed her face and got dressed, and sat at the small table by the window to watch the inner courtyard come awake. The yard was not large. Stone on all 4 sides, flagged floor, a single old tree in the center that had no business surviving in that much shade, but was surviving anyway. At the first light, the servants began crossing the yard, not hurrying, not dawdling. the practiced pace of people with known schedules and fixed destinations. She counted 6 in the first 10 minutes. None of them looked up at her window. She was studying Iron Hollow, the way she had always studied difficult things. From the outside first, watching the patterns, waiting for the pieces that didn't fit. Every place had them. The thing that was slightly off, the timing that was wrong, the person who moved differently from everyone else. Those mismatches were where the real information lived. By the time breakfast was served, she had already learned 3 things. First, the East Wing servants moved on a different schedule from the North Wing servants, which meant the North Wing operated independently. That confirmed what Senna had said about Calem's work, but it also meant the northern quarter of the fortress ran on its own internal logic, which a person could understand if they paid enough attention. Second, the guard rotation happened every 4 hours, not 3. 3 was standard in most packs. 4 was either confidence or complacency, and in a fortress this tightly run, she doubted it was complacency. Third, the old tree in the courtyard was not as old as it looked. The way it grew, leaning toward the south-facing wall rather than toward the open gap above, told her it had been planted when the wall it leaned toward was already there. It was perhaps 15 years old, though it looked 50. Something about this place accelerated things. She did not know yet what to do with any of this, but she filed it. Breakfast was the same as the day before. The long, silent hall, the careful not looking, the bread and porridge and hot bitter drink that the kitchen called tea. She sat in the same seat at the end of the lower table. This time, the woman across from her looked up. She was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that had been lived in hard and come out the other side of it. Short gray hair, hands that had done labor for decades. She met Nara's eyes for about 2 seconds, and then went back to her food, which told Nara exactly nothing, except that the woman was not afraid of looking. 3 seats down the table, a young man was eating with the mechanical efficiency of someone who is not tasting what he is eating, because his mind is somewhere else. He was perhaps 20, fair, with the shoulders of someone accustomed to outdoor work, and he had a small cut on his left hand that had been hastily wrapped and was bleeding through the cloth. He had not noticed. She almost said something. She decided to wait. She was not here to help people yet. She did not know enough to know whether helping people would help her or hurt her. After breakfast, she went back to the reading room. She had a plan for the morning. Yesterday she had found the worn books, the ones with the margin writing. Today she wanted to see whether all of the marked passages were in the same handwriting, or whether more than one person had been fighting with these texts. The answer would tell her something about whether the current master of Iron Hollow had come to his views alone, or had been shaped by someone who came before. She started at the far corner and worked her way along. 2 handwritings. One older, larger, slanting to the right, confident in a way that shaded into arrogance. One newer, smaller, pressing harder into the page. The newer one frequently disagreed with the older, often directly on the same page, sometimes mid-sentence. She found one page where the older writing said that an alpha's authority required no justification beyond result, and the newer writing had underlined the sentence twice and written beside it, "This is how cruelty hides." She stood at the shelf for a moment with the book open in her hands. Then she put it back. She was in the middle of the 3rd shelf when Senna appeared in the doorway. Nara had not heard her coming. This was either very good footwork on Senna's part or the mark of long practice at arriving without announcing herself, and Nara suspected both. "You are comfortable here?" Senna asked. It was a standard question, the kind that expected a standard answer. Nara gave her a standard answer. "Yes, thank you." Senna came further into the room, which was less standard. She looked at the shelves with the expression of someone performing casualness. "Do you read much?" she asked. "When I can," Nara said. "There are few Omegas in history who were also readers." Nara looked at her. "That is because most Omegas did not have access to libraries," she said, "not because of a shortage of Omegas with the ability to read." Senna's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the ghost of one. "The Alpha King was told you managed the grain records for your pack," Senna said. He found this interesting. Nara turned this over. "Grain records are not interesting," she said. "No," Senna agreed. "But the fact that they trusted you with numbers but not with rooms or decisions or a say in what happened to you. He found that pattern interesting." Nara said nothing. "I am telling you this because I believe it is useful for you to know," Senna said. I am not telling you this on his behalf. She moved back toward the door. He does not know I am here. Then why are you telling me? Senna stopped in the doorway. She looked at Nara, with the straight-on expression of someone who has decided to be direct because the alternatives are more trouble. Because I have been in this household for 11 years, she said. And in 11 years I have learned the difference between a person who arrived here because they wanted something and a person who arrived here because they were used as a tool by people who wanted something. The second kind is rarer and considerably more interesting. She paused. I thought you should know that someone has noticed the difference. She left. Nara stood in the reading room for a moment, very still. She looked at the shelf in front of her. She looked at the book she had just put back, the one with 2 arguing handwritings, and the note that said, "This is how cruelty hides." Then she sat down at the long table, folded her hands in front of her, and thought very carefully about what Senna had just told her, and more carefully still, about what Senna had not told her. 11 years. The Alpha King had been in power for 6. Senna had been here before him, which meant she had known the father, had watched the transition, had continued under the sun. In every household Nara had ever known, the people who stayed through transitions were either too embedded to leave, or too useful to be removed. Senna did not seem like either kind. She seemed like someone who stayed because she had chosen to. That was a very particular kind of person. She was still thinking about it when the young man with the cut hand appeared in the doorway of the reading room. He looked surprised to find it occupied. He held a stack of maps under one arm, and his wrapped hand was now bleeding more visibly. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't know anyone was in here." "You are bleeding on the map under your left arm," Nara said. He looked down. He made a frustrated sound. He shifted the maps to his right arm and looked at his left hand, with the expression of someone who has been told something they are not happy about, but cannot argue with. "It's fine," he said. "It is not," she said. "Sit down." He blinked. People did not, apparently, tell him to sit down. She gestured at the chair across from her, and he sat in it, with the slightly confused compliance of someone following an instruction that arrived too quickly to question. She opened her coat pocket. She had started carrying the book of plant medicines and a small roll of clean cloth the second day, not because she expected to need them, but because it cost nothing to have them, and there was always a cost to not having things when you needed them. She unwrapped his hand, which had a clean cut across the heel of the palm. Wood or metal. Not deep enough to need stitching, but messy enough to need real attention. She cleaned it. She applied a compress from the book's most basic instructions. She rewrapped it with the clean cloth. "What is your name?" she asked while she worked. "Cal," he said. Then, "Short for Calvin. I work in the archive room, mostly. Also do the northern mail runs." "The northern mail run goes past the border?" "Only to the relay point," he said. 2 hours north." She filed that. "How did you cut your hand?" "Cabinet hinge," he said. "In the archive. The third cabinet from the left in the back row has a hinge that sticks and then releases very fast." He paused. "I've told the steward about it 3 times." "What does the steward say?" "He says he'll have someone look at it." And no one looks at it." She tied off the cloth wrap and sat back. He looked at his hand and then at her, with a different expression than the one he had come in with. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do that." "The mail relay point 2 hours north," she said. "Does it run east or west from there? Or does it stop?" He looked at her for a moment, not suspiciously, assessing. She met his eyes and did not look away. Something in the assessment seemed to resolve itself in her favor. "East," he said quietly. "East and then north again. There is a track that picks up about a 1/4 mile past the relay point, runs through the tree line. Does it stay inside Iron Hollow's territory?" "For the first part." She nodded once and asked him nothing further. He gathered his maps, most of which had survived, and left. She watched him go, and noted that he had answered her, without asking her why she wanted to know. That said something about the kind of person he was. It also said something about the atmosphere of Iron Hollow more generally, that a young man who did the mail runs and managed the archive had decided, in a 5-minute interaction, that she was worth being honest with. She thought about Senna choosing to come to the reading room to tell her what she had told her. She thought about the guard rotation that was 4 hours instead of 3. She thought about the tree in the courtyard that grew toward the wall. Iron Hollow was not what any of the stories described. She was becoming more certain of this by the hour. It was not a fortress of cruelty. It was a fortress of something harder to name, something compressed and careful, and watched from the inside, with as much attention as it was watched from the outside. She spent the afternoon in the reading room, and found 3 more books with the margin writing. In the last one she found a page where the newer handwriting had abandoned argument entirely, and had written something in a different register, quieter, not fighting with the text but separate from it. They will call it madness. Anything they cannot control will always be called madness. Name-calling is the cheapest way to remove what you cannot understand. She read it twice. Then she closed the book and put it back on the shelf exactly where she had found it. Dinner that evening was the same as breakfast and lunch had been. Quiet, ordered, unremarkable. She sat in her usual seat. The gray-haired woman with the worked hands was across from her again. This time, when their eyes met, the woman held it for a full 4 seconds before looking down. Not a challenge, an acknowledgement. After dinner, walking back through the east corridor, Nara passed the junction where the northern wing began. The guard was there, as before. The door at the end of the northern corridor was open, just slightly, and from somewhere beyond it she could hear the very faint, specific sound of papers being moved. The sound of someone working late. She did not stop walking. She did not slow down. But she listened. In her room that night, with the chair against the door and the knife on the mattress, she lay with her hands behind her head and looked at the ceiling and thought about what kind of man stays up half the night working on whatever is in the northern wing and asks a girl on her first audience, in a room full of maps and cold coffee, whether she was told why they chose her specifically. Not, "Are you afraid of me?" Not, "Do you understand your position here?" Whether she was told why. Because he knew. She was increasingly certain of this. He knew something about why she had been chosen, and he was waiting to see whether she knew it too. And when she said she did not, something in his face changed. That flicker she had seen, the one she had spent the night trying to name. She named it now, lying in the dark. It was guilt. She didn't know yet what he felt guilty for. She didn't know what he knew about her that she did not know. Those were questions for later. What mattered right now was the recognition. This man, the one they called the Mad Alpha King, was operating under the weight of something he had not told her. And she was going to have to find out what it was before it found her first. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep well, but she slept. The first thing Nara noticed on the 3rd day was that the northern wing door was closed. Not locked. She checked when she walked past it with her breakfast tray, tilting her head just slightly as if she were looking at something on the far wall, but fully shut in the way of a door that had not been opened yet that morning. Calum Voss had stayed up most of the night, worked through most of it by the sound she had heard, and had not yet surfaced. She filed this. Not judgment, information. The second thing she noticed was that Calvin, the young man with the cut hand, had left the door of the archive room open. This was probably not intentional. She could see the edge of a cabinet from the hallway, the third from the left, she noted, and the way its hinge caught the light suggested it was the one he had mentioned. She did not stop, but she looked. The third thing she noticed happened at breakfast, and it was the thing that stayed with her the longest. She was seated in her usual place when the older woman across from her, the one with short gray hair and worked hands, set her cup down with unusual precision and said, in a voice that carried only as far as the space between them, "You have been counting the exits." Nara looked at her. "Every day," the woman said, "you look at the corridors, you look at the gates, you look at the guards when they rotate." She picked up her cup again. "I did the same thing my first month here." Nara said nothing. "My name is Edith," the woman said. "I came to Iron Hollow 8 years ago. My alpha sold my contract to settle a debt. That is not legal under pack law. Very little that happens to low-ranking pack members is legal under pack law," Edith said, without bitterness. "The way you say something you have had time to make peace with. But I am here, and here is not bad, which is more than I can say for where I came from." "What made it not bad?" Nara asked. Edith looked at her with those direct, unhurried eyes. "Being seen," she said. "Not immediately, but eventually. Being seen by someone who runs a household according to what is actually fair, rather than according to what makes the most powerful people comfortable." She stood, gathering her dishes. That is all I will say. I do not know what brought you here, or what they told you about this place. I am only telling you what is true from where I stand. She looked down at Nara one more time. Stop counting exits for a day. Just look at what is actually here. She walked away. Nara sat with her tea cooling in front of her, and thought about a woman who had been sold like a debt payment, and chose to call this fortress not bad, and mean it. That was a piece that did not fit the story she had been given. She spent the morning in the East Wing, rather than the reading room, partly because she had already gathered most of what the reading room had to give her, and partly because she wanted to see the parts of the fortress that moved. The East Wing held the kitchens and laundry, and the rooms where the physical work of keeping a fortress operational happened, and physical work always told you things that words did not. The kitchens were organized with a precision that seemed excessive until she looked more carefully and understood that the precision was the point. 3 people cooked at any given time, each with a defined station, and the result was no waste, no redundancy, no one standing idle. The food that came out of that kitchen was plain, but it was enough, and it was consistent. She had eaten plain, consistent food in Crescent Ridge, and she knew it required real management to maintain. In the laundry room, she found 2 women sorting linen with the speed of long practice, talking quietly to each other in a way that stopped only slightly when she appeared in the doorway. She apologized for interrupting. One of them waved a hand, not dismissal, welcome, the gesture of someone who had no reason to be cautious. "Are you settling in?" this woman asked. Her name, Nara learned, was Hester. She was broad and cheerful, and had a birthmark along her left jaw that she did not appear to notice. "The East Wing rooms take some getting used to. The drafts come in funny." "My room faces the inner courtyard," Nara said. "It is warmer than I expected." "The Alpha King had the inner courtyard rooms upgraded 3 years ago," Hester said, returning to her sorting. "Said the cold was not acceptable for people who live and work here. We all got new window frames." She shook her head in the pleasant way of someone recounting a fact they still find slightly surprising. "The ones from the old frames went to the groundskeeper for his wood stove." Nara looked at her. "He upgraded the window frames? And the floor coverings on the 2nd level? And the heating pipes on the north side?" Hester glanced up. "I know what they say out there about him. They say a lot." She went back to the linen. "What I know is that 3 winters ago, my room stopped being the coldest place in the fortress. I know what that is worth." Nara thanked her, and walked back into the corridor, and stood for a moment, in the stone-floored quiet, with this new information. New window frames, floor coverings, heating pipes. Not the fortress, the living quarters. The rooms of the people who worked here. She thought about the dining hall, the quiet, the consistency, enough food, prepared with discipline, every day. She thought about Edith, who had been sold like a debt, and did not describe Iron Hollow with bitterness. She thought about Calvin's cut hand, and the cabinet hinge, and the steward who kept saying he would send someone, and didn't, and whether the Alpha King who upgraded the heating pipes knew about that particular small failure, and what would happen if he did. She was building a picture. She was not yet sure what the picture meant, but it was the kind of picture that contradicted almost every story she had been told about this place, and that, in her experience, was when pictures became very important. She was halfway back to her room when Senna appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving quickly. Not running. Senna would not run in the corridors, Nara felt certain, but close. "He will see you now," Senna said. The second summons had a different texture than the first. The first had been an observation, a single question, a dismissal. This one, she could feel it even before she reached the door, was going to be different. She did not know how she knew. She knew. She followed Senna into the northern wing, past the guard, through the corridor she had mapped 3 days ago and not entered. The door to the map room was open. He was at the same table with the same cold coffee, but the maps were different, spread to show a wider territory, and he was not standing with his back to the door this time. He was looking directly at it when she entered. He had been waiting. She walked to the center of the room and stopped. She did not look at his face right away. She looked at the maps on the table. She recognized the eastern territories, the boundary lines, the 3 major pack clusters on the northern route. She recognized them because she had spent 2 years cross-referencing grain shipment records against territorial ownership, and she knew the landscape of this region in numbers better than she knew it in miles. "You have read the grain inventories for Crescent Ridge," he said. Not a question. She looked up. "I manage them," she said. For 2 years. Sit down. He had not offered her a seat the first time. Something had changed. She sat in the chair across from the table. He remained standing. He put both hands on the edge of the table and looked at the map and said, without looking at her, "The western corridor of the Crescent Ridge southern border. The pack maintains a claim on 3 transit points between their territory and Morrow's Run. Who actually controls those transit points?" She looked at the map. She looked at him. "Morrow's Run has controlled them for at least 4 years," she said. "The Crescent Ridge elders renegotiated the access rights without telling the full pack council. I found the record of it when I was reconciling grain shipment discrepancies in the southern ledgers. The numbers did not add up for the claimed delivery routes, but they added up perfectly for a route that passed through Morrow's Run-controlled land on the assumption that the transit fee was being quietly paid." He lifted his eyes from the map and looked at her. "Did you tell anyone in the council?" he said. "I told Gordon Vane," she said. "He told me I had made an arithmetic error." There was a pause. A very short one. "You had not made an arithmetic error," Calum said. "No," she said, "I had not." He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the room made its sounds. Outside, the wind was up. She could hear it against the stone. "They told my beta," he said, choosing words with visible care, "that you were the most suitable tribute because you were unbonded and unattached, and your removal from the pack would cause the least disruption." She looked at him. "They said nothing about what you actually knew," he said. "No," she said, "they would not." He pulled the nearest map toward him and studied it for a moment. She watched his hands. They were still, entirely still, which she had learned in the past 3 days was his default state. The stillness was not calm exactly. It was the visible result of very deliberate control. She recognized that too. The transit point arrangement changes the political calculation on 4 of the 7 border alliances in this region, he said. He looked up. If Crescent Ridge has been quietly paying transit fees to Morrow's Run without declaring the arrangement, it means they have been buying access they legally already own, which means someone in Morrow's Run has been collecting fees on a false premise, which means there is a financial arrangement running beneath the declared relationships between those 2 packs, that no one on my side of the table has been accounting for. He stopped. He looked at her. She looked at the map and said, "The Morrow's Run contact in the arrangement is a man named Bennett Oakes. He runs the southern checkpoint. I do not know who he reports to in the Morrow's Run structure, but the timeline of the payment suggests the arrangement began 3 or 4 years after the current Morrow's Run Alpha came to power." Silence. "How do you know his name?" Calum asked. "Because I cross-referenced the transit records with the checkpoint log signatures, until the handwriting on 3 separate transit authorizations matched the handwriting on a Morrow's Run consignment record that came through our southern receiving station in year 2, she said. The signatures matched. His name was on the consignment record. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. "Why did you not tell anyone else?" he asked. "I told Gordon Vane," she said, "who told me I had made an error. There was no one else to tell." She paused. "And then I was put in a cart and sent here." The fire crackled. The map lay between them on the table. In the corridor outside, the guard made his quiet 4-hour rotation. Calum Voss straightened. He pulled out the second chair at the table. He set it at the near corner, not across from him, but adjacent. The position of someone being brought in, rather than held at distance. "Sit here," he said. She got up from the chair she was in and moved to the one at the corner of the table. He unrolled a second map and laid it over the first, and he said, "Start from the beginning." She started from the beginning. They worked for 3 hours. She told him everything she had found in the grain records, everything she had cross-referenced, every discrepancy and what it pointed to. He asked questions, not the flat, testing kind, but the sharp, focused kind of someone who is already ahead of you and wants to know if you are keeping up. She kept up. She answered without hesitation on the things she knew, and said, "I don't know," on the things she did not, without padding the gaps. He did not need her to pad the gaps. He needed the accurate edges. At some point, she did not notice exactly when, a second cup appeared on the table, hot, beside her hand. She looked at it, and then at him. He was already looking at the map. She drank it. By the end of the 3rd hour, the maps were covered in new notations, most in his handwriting. She had given him, she understood, more useful intelligence about the southwestern border arrangements than his beta's entire external network had produced in 6 months. She could see this in the way he worked through the implications, each new fact changing the weight of the ones before it, the kind of systemic revision that only happened when real information arrived. He sat back when they finished. He looked at the maps, and then at the ceiling, and then at her. "I will need you to write this out formally," he said. "Everything you remember, in order, with the sources you drew from. I can do that. Starting tomorrow." "All right." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him decide something. She could see the decision happening, not in his expression, which remained still, but in the particular quality of the silence. "You will have full access to the reading room," he said, "and the archive room. You will report to Senna if you need materials." She looked at him. "Not to you?" "I am in the northern wing most of the day," he said. "Senna is more accessible." A brief pause. "If what you find is significant, you may bring it directly to me." She nodded. He stood. She stood. He looked at the maps one more time. "The grain records," he said. "Did you memorize them?" "Most of them." He looked at her. The stillness, always. The gray-green eyes, always moving behind it. "All right," he said. She left the room. In the corridor, alone, she walked at her ordinary pace, and kept her face arranged in its ordinary pattern, and filed away everything that had happened in the past 3 hours. He had given her access. He had given her a task. He had listened, really listened, without the performance of patience, for 3 solid hours, and he had not once treated the information as less credible because of who was delivering it. She thought about the question he had asked on the first day. Did they tell you why they chose you specifically? He had known, even then, what they had known. They had not chosen her for neutrality or suitability. They had chosen her because she had found something they needed to disappear, and putting her in a cart and sending her to the feared Alpha King who demanded tribute was a very efficient way of making her and her information disappear simultaneously. He had known that. He had called her in on the 3rd day anyway. She turned this over for the rest of the afternoon. She was still turning it over after dinner, sitting on the floor of her room with her back against the wall, and the fire going properly now, because she had learned how to manage the flu. She turned it over while the fortress went quiet around her, and the wind settled, and the sounds of the place, stone and fire, and the particular cadence of a guard's footsteps on an outer wall, became familiar in the way sounds become familiar when you have been somewhere long enough to name them. She was not going to decide what she thought about him yet. It was too early, and the information was incomplete, and decisions made on incomplete information were the thing she tried hardest to avoid. But she was going to write the formal record. She was going to write it very carefully and completely. And she was going to write it because the information was true and it mattered, and because she allowed herself this once. For the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at what she knew and not called it an error. She opened the book of plant medicines to the back, where the pages were blank. She found a pen in her coat pocket. She began to write. The night of the 3rd day stretched into what the fortress called the binding hours, a term Nara learned from Hester in the laundry, who mentioned it sideways, the way people mention things they are not sure whether to mention. According to pack custom in Iron Hollow, and in most of the surrounding territories, the first full night shared by an Alpha King and his bonded or tribute mate carried a particular weight, not always ceremonial, sometimes simply witnessed. The point was that it happened. The point was that everyone knew. Nara learned this at midday, sitting in the archive room with Calvin, who was reorganizing a shelf of territorial maps, and had been talking at a comfortable, unhurried pace about the general workings of the fortress for 40 minutes. She had been encouraging this. Calvin was the kind of person who, once he decided to trust you, organized his thoughts aloud, and shared them freely, and she was learning a great deal. "It is tonight, then," he said, as if they had already been discussing it. "What is tonight?" she said. He looked at her. He had the expression of someone who has put his foot into something he did not expect. "The binding night," he said. "The first formal night." He paused. "I thought you would have been told." "I was not told," Nara said. Calvin set down the map he was holding. He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at her. "Senna should have," he started. "She did not," Nara said. "What does it involve?" "It depends on the household," he said carefully. In some pacts it is purely ceremonial, a shared meal, a formal acknowledgement. He was choosing each word with great deliberateness. In others it is. He stopped. I understand, Nara said. But Alpha King Voss has never. He stopped again. I mean to say, there has not been a tribute here before. He has refused 3 alliance bonds. The last time there was a... Calvin, she said. He looked at her. What do the people in this fortress expect to happen tonight? She asked. Plainly, directly, because there was no useful version of this question that was also gentle. He was quiet for a moment. They expect, the old way, he said, because the Alpha King accepted the tribute, because not accepting the tribute would have meant war with Crescent Ridge, and he chose to avoid that. So they assume he accepted the tribute the way tributes are accepted. Which means the first night is what it sounds like. Calvin looked like he would very much like to be somewhere else. Yes, he said quietly. Nara sat with this for a moment. Not panicking. Panicking was what happened when you ran out of thoughts, and she had not yet run out of thoughts. Does the Alpha King know tonight is considered the binding night? She asked. He set the calendar, Calvin said. So, yes. And he has said nothing to me about it. Calvin said nothing. All right, Nara said. She stood up. Thank you. She went back to her room, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something that was not quite fear, but was its immediate neighbor, and then she put it away, and started thinking. He had set the calendar. He had called her in yesterday, and worked with her for 3 hours on border intelligence. He had given her access to the archive and the reading room. He had not spoken a single word about tonight. There were 2 possible readings of this. 1. He was a man who compartmentalized efficiently, and the work was the work, and tonight was tonight, and he had simply not addressed the second thing yet. In which case, she needed to know what was coming. 2. He had not addressed it because he did not intend it to be what everyone expected, and he was not sure how to say that, or whether to say it, or had simply not gotten to it yet. She was going to have to find out which. She did not go to him directly. She went to Senna. Senna was in the small office near the entrance to the East Wing, managing what appeared to be the week's laundry schedule. Nara closed the door and turned around and said, Is there something I should know about tonight? Senna set down her pen. She looked at Nara for a moment, with an expression that was not quite guilt, but was sitting right beside it. I intended to speak with you this afternoon, she said. You can speak with me now, Nara said. Senna folded her hands on the desk. She said, By custom, and by the expectation of this household, tonight is considered the first binding night. The servants and the senior staff will not be present. You will be shown to the West Chamber at dusk. The Alpha King will be already present. And they expect whatever they expect, Senna said. I am telling you what will happen, not what they expect. Nara looked at her. Those are 2 different things? Senna met her eyes. I have been in this household for 11 years, she said. I know the Alpha King. She said nothing further. She was leaving the rest of it. Nara took the rest of it and carried it carefully back through the corridors to her room, and she sat down and thought very hard. She thought about the margin writing. This is how cruelty hides. She thought about the window frames and the heating pipes, and Edith, who was sold as a debt, and said Iron Hollow was not bad, and meant it. She thought about 3 hours at a map table with a second cup of coffee that arrived beside her hand, unannounced, while he was looking at the map. She thought about a man who asks whether you were told why they chose you, before he tells you a single word about himself. She was not certain. She was not making decisions on incomplete information. But she had a strong hypothesis. At dusk, a young servant girl she had not yet met knocked on her door and offered to walk her to the West Chamber. Nara thanked her and followed. The West Chamber was larger than her room. It had a fire built properly, 2 chairs arranged near it, a table between them, with what appeared to be 2 cups. She noticed the cups first. Then she noticed him. Calum Voss was standing near the window, looking out into the dark. He turned when she came in. He looked at her face, and then at the rest of the room, and then back at her face, and something shifted in his expression, something controlled and careful, that she was beginning, very slowly, to learn to read. He was not relaxed. He was not at ease. He was a man holding himself very still because he was not sure what she was expecting, and he had not yet said the thing he had come here to say. She had seen this expression before. She had worn it before. She walked to the near chair and sat down. She looked at him and said, "Is the other cup for you or for decoration?" He blinked, just once. Then, with the particular movement of someone whose plan has been slightly recalibrated by reality, he crossed the room and sat in the other chair. He picked up his cup. She picked up hers. "I did not ask for a tribute," he said. Not as an opening. More like the statement that had been waiting behind his teeth since the first summons. "I know," she said. "Senna told me." "Senna should not have." "Senna told me, because I asked her directly," Nara said. "And she told me, because she believed it was useful for me to know. I agree with her." He looked at the fire. He was quiet for a moment. "What they sent you here as," he said carefully, "is not what I intend this to be." Nara looked at her cup. The tea was the same bitter kind from the dining hall. She had grown to like it. "What they sent me here as was a girl with information that made them uncomfortable," she said, wrapped in the language of tribute so they could tell themselves they had handled two problems at once. He turned and looked at her with the full weight of his attention. Not the managed stillness, but something underneath it. Something that was actually looking. "Yes," he said. "That is what they did." "I know," she said. "I worked it out." Silence. The fire. The wind outside. "You can leave before dawn," he said. "If you choose. I will have Owen." "Owen left," she said. "And I am not leaving before dawn." He looked at her. "Not because I have nowhere to go," she said, before he could make the wrong assumption. "I have places I can go. The route through the eastern relay point is passable in winter, if you know where the drift spots are." She looked at him. "I am not leaving because I am in the middle of something. The border records. Among other things." She held the cup with both hands. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass. "I want to know what you are doing in the northern wing, every night until the early morning," she said. "Not for leverage. I want to know what actually goes on in this fortress, what it is actually for, because everyone inside it seems to believe in something that the people outside it have never been told, and I want to understand what that thing is." He looked at her for a long time. The fire moved. The shadows on the wall moved with it. "That," he said, "will take more than one night to explain." "I am not in a hurry," she said. He was quiet. Then he opened a drawer in the low table between them. She had not noticed the drawer, and he took out a book. He set it on the table. She recognized it. It was from the reading room, one of the worn ones. "Someone was reading this," she said. "I read it regularly," he said. "I read it too," she said. "I read the margins." He went very still in the particular way that meant something had surprised him through the management. "You read the margins," he said. "The older handwriting, and the newer one," she said. "The one that keeps arguing with it." A pause. "A real one." "The older handwriting is my father's," he said. "The newer is mine." She looked at the book. "He wrote in his books," Calum said. "I grew up reading his margins. When I took over, I went back and argued with them." He looked at the fire. "We did not agree on much. His approach to leadership." He stopped. He believed authority was its own justification. She thought of the line, "This is how cruelty hides." "And you do not," she said. "No," he said. "I do not." The fire burned. The two cups sat between them on the table. The book lay with its worn spine facing upward, carrying 11 years of argument in its margins. She said, "What else is in those shelves that you want to argue about?" He looked at her. The careful stillness, always. But behind it, in that steady gray-green regard, something shifted. Something that was, if she was reading it right, closer to the beginning of relief than anything else she had seen in this fortress. "A great deal," he said. She settled back in her chair. He opened the book. They talked until the fire burned low, and then they built it back up, and talked some more. And at some point, she stopped tracking the time, because she was too busy listening, and when the first gray light came through the window, neither of them had moved to the other side of the room, and neither of them mentioned the binding night, and neither of them needed to. The whole fortress was waiting for what had happened. What had happened was this. Two people with things to say found, for the first time in longer than either of them cared to count, someone who wanted to hear it. That was, in the end, more surprising than anything the stories had promised. The morning after the binding night, the corridor outside the west chamber was not empty. She noted this before she opened the door, the particular quality of the silence that meant people were moving carefully, trying to be elsewhere before being seen. By the time she stepped out, no one was directly in the corridor, but she counted 4 rapid departures in peripheral vision before the junction. They had been listening for something. She kept her face neutral and walked toward the east wing. By breakfast, the quality of the silence in the dining hall was different from what she had encountered on the previous mornings. Before, the quiet had been the quiet of routine. Now it was the quiet of people not saying things, which was a very different thing, louder in its way, more pressured. She sat in her place, she ate. She looked at her food and not at the room, and listened. The currents were there. She could feel them without identifying every source. People glancing at her. Not with hostility, not most of them. With the cautious, recalibrating attention of people who had expected one thing and received another, and were still working out what the other meant. Edith, across from her, said nothing until the meal was nearly done. Then she said, "The kitchen is out of the strong tea this week. They have the mild kind." "I will manage," Nara said. Edith nodded and stood with her dishes and walked away. It was not a conversation about tea. After breakfast, Senna found her in the reading room, which Nara suspected was not a coincidence. Senna came in and closed the door with the quiet decisiveness of someone who has decided to say a thing and is not going to let the moment pass. "The senior staff are asking questions," Senna said. "I imagine they are," Nara said. "They were expecting a formal announcement this morning," Senna said. "Of the bond, or its terms. There has been none." "Has the Alpha King made announcements of this kind before?" Nara asked. Senna paused. "Not precisely," she said. "There has been no previous situation of this." "Senna," Nara said, "what do the senior staff actually want to know?" Senna folded her hands. "Whether you have influence," she said. "Whether your presence here changes anything. Whether the Alpha King is altered in some way by your arrival." She looked at her. "People who run a household need to know who to answer to and in what order." Nara considered this. "I do not currently have a role in the household structure," she said. "I have been given access to the archive and the reading room, and I am compiling a written record for the Alpha King on border intelligence. That is the extent of my function here, as I understand it. And what is the extent of your function, as he understands it?" "You would have to ask him," Nara said. "I do not speak for him." Senna looked at her for a moment. "He has been in the northern wing since before breakfast," she said. "He has not come out. That is his normal pattern." "No," Senna said. "His normal pattern is to come out by mid-morning. He has meetings scheduled. He has cancelled them." She looked at Nara steadily. "He has not done that in the 3 years I have managed his schedule." Nara absorbed this. "He is not cancelling meetings because of last night," she said. "What is he cancelling them for?" Senna asked. "Because the information I gave him about the Crescent Ridge border arrangements changes his entire calculation on the southwestern alliances," Nara said. "He needs time to rework the approach before he speaks to anyone. If he goes into those meetings with the old assumptions still in place, he will make commitments he will need to unmake later." She paused. "I would do the same thing." Senna looked at her for a long moment. "You talked about the border records last night," Senna said. "Among other things," Nara said. Another moment. Then something in Senna's face resolved. Not softening, not quite, but settling. Arriving somewhere it had been moving toward. "You should know," Senna said, "that certain members of the senior staff will interpret your presence here as a political development, whether or not that is what it is." "I understand," Nara said. "People will begin to manage their relationship with you, based on the assumption that you have the Alpha King's attention. Some will try to use that. Some will try to remove it." "I know how courts work," Nara said. "You know how pack councils work," Senna said. "This is different. More concentrated. The fortress is smaller than a full pack, which means the political distances are shorter. What would take 6 months to develop in a pack council can happen here in 6 days." Nara looked at her. "Is this a warning?" "It is information," Senna said. "The same as what I gave you before. I give you information I believe you should have, because I have decided you are someone worth giving it to." She moved toward the door. "What you do with it is your concern." She left. Nara sat at the long table and thought about what Senna had just told her, and beyond that, about what Senna was. In 11 years, a woman who ran this household and managed this schedule, had watched the old Alpha, and now the new one, had outlasted 3 senior staff configurations, had given Nara 2 separate pieces of unsolicited useful information on separate days. She had not asked for anything in return. She had not positioned herself for credit. She had simply helped. Nara knew exactly what kind of person did that. It was the kind of person who had decided, at some point, that the institution they served was worth serving honestly, that the person at its head was worth protecting by telling them the truth. Senna was not a neutral party. She was a committed one, and what she was committed to, as far as Nara could read it, was the version of Iron Hollow that actually existed, not the story that the outside world told, not the stories the inside world told itself, but the actual working reality of a fortress run by a man who upgraded the window frames and canceled his meetings when new information required rethinking. That was not the court of a mad tyrant. That was something considerably more interesting. Calvin found her at lunch, sliding into the seat beside her with the slightly conspiratorial ease of someone who has decided to be on a particular side, and is not conflicted about it. "The senior staff are meeting," he said quietly, "the ones who were already in their positions before the Alpha King took over." "How many?" she said. "4, I think. Graves, who runs the outer guard rotation. Marion Keel, who manages the Pack Alliance's correspondence. Old Fenwick from the lower stores. And," he paused, "Aldrich Walsh." "Who is Aldrich Walsh?" "Senior Beta Council," Calvin said. "He was your father's." He caught himself. "The previous Alphas." He was the previous Alpha's first council. He stayed on when Calum Voss took leadership. He has stayed on for 6 years. "Why?" "Because he is very good at his position," Calvin said, "and because removing him would have looked like purging the old guard, which the Alpha King did not want to do." He ate a spoonful of something. "He is also, depending on who you ask, the most politically connected person in this fortress." Nara turned this over. "And he is meeting with 3 others this morning, the day after I arrived from a binding night that did not go the way they expected." "Yes," Calvin said. "What does Aldrich Walsh want?" she asked. Calvin was quiet for a moment. "He wants the fortress to run the way it ran under the old Alpha," he said. "He has always wanted this. He has been very patient about it. 6 years is a long time to wait." "And what did the old Alpha's fortress look like?" she said. Calvin looked at his food. "Different," he said. She heard the weight in the word. She did not push. She filed it. She spent the afternoon writing the formal border record as Calum had asked. She wrote at the archive table, longhand, in the ordered way she had always organized grain records, not narrative but systematic, each source identified, each cross-reference explained, each inference clearly marked as inference, and each fact clearly marked as fact. She was meticulous about the distinction. The distinction mattered. By late afternoon she had 12 pages. Her hand ached. She flexed it and kept writing. Calvin brought her tea at some point without being asked. She thanked him without looking up. He left without comment. She noted, in the portion of her mind that was always noting, that this was the second time she had been brought something without requesting it, and both times the person bringing it had simply left it and moved on. First the second cup in the northern wing map room, now this. She did not know what to do with this pattern except to keep noting it. At dusk, Senna knocked and entered and said, "He is asking for you." She capped her pen. She gathered the 12 pages and straightened them against the table. She walked to the northern wing. He was standing at the map table again, but the maps were cleared. On the table in their place was a single piece of paper with handwriting she recognized as his, and beside it a stack of correspondence that had the texture of things that had been read and reconsidered. He turned when she came in. She set the 12 pages on the table in front of him. He picked them up. He read the first page and then the second without speaking, and she watched his face while he read, which was something she was doing more often and getting better at. She was learning the specific texture of his focus, the particular quality of his attention when something he was reading mattered. He read all 12 pages. He did not rush. He went back to 3 of them and read those sections again. Then he set them down. "This is more than I expected," he said. "I have not finished," she said. "There are at least 6 more pages of cross-references. Possibly 8. He looked at her. The Bennett Oaks connection runs deeper than I told you yesterday, she said. I kept working on it this afternoon. The payment timeline, when I plotted against the Morrow's Run leadership calendar, suggests the arrangement was not initiated by Oaks. He was given the checkpoint role specifically to manage it, which means the directive came from above him. How far above him? Far enough that it involves at least one person who also has a declared alliance with Iron Hollow, she said. The quality of his stillness shifted, just slightly. Write the rest of it, he said. I will have it done by tomorrow afternoon. He nodded. He looked at the 12 pages, and then out the window, and then back at her. Senna tells me you spoke to the staff this morning, he said. Senna spoke to me, she said. I mostly listened. She said you were direct. I tried to be accurate, Nara said, which sometimes reads as direct. He looked at her for a moment. Aldrich Walsh is going to ask to meet with you, he said. He will make it seem casual. He will suggest a meal in the East Hall, or a walk in the outer yard. She looked at him. You know about this morning's meeting. I know about every meeting in this fortress, he said. I am simply usually patient about what to do with what I know. He looked at the papers on the table. Walsh is not dangerous in the way people imagine dangerous things, he said. He is dangerous in the way a current is dangerous. Constant, patient, always moving in the same direction. He has been moving in the same direction for 6 years. What direction? She said. He met her eyes. Away from what I am building here, he said, and back toward what my father built. She held his gaze. What did your father build? She said. The fire. The wind. The papers on the table between them. Something that worked, he said, by making everyone inside it afraid. He looked away, back at the maps on the side wall. It was efficient, he said. In the way that fear is always efficient. And it lasted, in the way that fear built things last, until the moment it didn't, and then it ended very fast. He paused. He died of a sudden illness. That is the official record. She said nothing. There is no unofficial record, he said. I was not there. I do not know what happened. He looked at her. I am telling you this because you are reading the margins, and the margins will tell you what I thought about him, and I would rather you have the context from me directly than have to fill it in yourself. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He looked at the 12 pages again. Aldrich Walsh will try to find out what you know, he said. And what you mean here. He will try to determine whether you are a problem. And what should I tell him? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Tell him the truth, he said, that you are writing a formal record, that your role here is undefined, that you are finding your footing. He looked up. The truth will worry him more than anything else you could say. He is accustomed to people hiding things. Someone who hides nothing is much harder to manage. She almost smiled. You are describing yourself. He looked at her. Something moved behind the stillness. Not a smile, not quite, but the shape of one that had been there a long time ago and had not entirely left. Yes, he said, among others. She gathered her coat. She had not taken it off. She did it on habit now, kept it on indoors, because the habit of not getting comfortable had been worn into her by 3 years of needing to be ready to move. She was going to have to unlearn some of those habits. She was not sure when. She walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped. The correspondence on the table, she said. The stack on the right. I could see the return seal from where I stood. Morrow's Run. He did not turn around, but he stopped moving. Yes, he said. When did it arrive? This morning. She looked at the back of his head, at the dark hair, the stillness of his shoulders. The line of a man who was carrying more information than he was sharing, not because he intended to hide it, but because he had been carrying things alone for long enough that sharing them did not come first. We should talk about that tomorrow, she said. A pause. Yes, he said. We should. She left. In the corridor she walked at her usual pace. Inside she was very still, in a different way than she usually meant when she said still. Not the managed stillness, not the controlled surface, but the stillness of something that has found a level. Whatever Morrow's Run was sending, whatever was coming from that direction, she had more to do with than any of them had planned for. She reached her room. She moved the chair away from the door. She did not put it back. She sat at the table and opened the back of her mother's book and began writing the next 6 pages. The letter sat in the center of Nara's table like something that had arrived from another life, which in a way it had. She had not been there when it came. Calvin told her about it at midday, quietly, in the corridor near the archive room, his voice carrying only as far as needed. "Something arrived this morning in the East Post," he said, "from Crescent Ridge. Your name is not on it. It is addressed to Iron Hollow Senior Correspondence. Senna has it." Nara kept walking. "Has the Alpha King seen it?" "Senna has it," Calvin repeated, which was not an answer, which was itself an answer. She found Senna in the small office at the end of the East Wing, and she knocked once, and went in, and closed the door. Senna was at her desk. On the desk was an envelope that had been opened and refastened with the careful crease of someone who had read it and not yet decided what to do. "It is addressed to Senior Household Correspondence in Iron Hollow," Senna said. "It is from the Crescent Ridge Elder Council. It asks, in the language of formal inquiry, whether the tribute has settled." She paused on the word with the slight distaste of someone who knows a euphemism when they see one. "It is specifically asking whether there have been any complications." She met Nara's eyes. "They are asking whether you are still a problem." Nara sat down in the chair across from Senna's desk. She was quiet for a moment. "They want to know if it worked," she said, not a question. "Yes," Senna said. "They sent me here hoping the question of what I knew would resolve itself," Nara said. "And they are writing to find out whether it has." Senna said nothing. Nara looked at the envelope, the crease where Senna had refastened it, the handwriting on the front. She recognized it, even at this angle. Gordon Vane's, the same hand that had addressed itself to the floorboards the morning he announced her name. "Senna," she said, "did you bring this to him first?" A pause. "Not the recalibrating kind, the honest kind." "No," Senna said. "I came to you first." Nara looked at her. "I wanted you to know," Senna said, "before he did. Because once he sees it, the information belongs to both of you, and I wanted you to have a moment with it that belonged only to you." She looked at the envelope. "It is not much, but it is something." Nara held the envelope between both hands. She did not open it. She had already been told the contents, and that was enough for now. She looked at the familiar handwriting on the front, and she felt something that was not grief, and was not rage, but was in the neighborhood of both of them, a kind of flat, clear recognition. They had sent her here as a disposal, and they were writing in formal language to confirm the disposal had taken. She set it down. "He should see it," she said. "Yes," Senna said, "he should. I will bring it to him." Senna looked at her. "Are you certain?" "It involves me," Nara said. "I want to be in the room." She picked up the envelope and carried it through the East Wing, and the main corridor, and the junction where the Northern Wing began, past the guard, who lifted his eyes briefly, and then looked away, through the door, and down the corridor to the map room. She knocked. "Come in." He was at the side table today, not the main one, working over a set of documents she could not read from the doorway. He turned when she entered. He saw the envelope in her hand, and went very still. Not the managed stillness. A different kind. She crossed to the main table and set the envelope on it. "From Crescent Ridge," she said. "It arrived this morning. It is addressed to Senior Household Correspondence." Senna opened it. "I have been told the contents." He looked at the envelope. He did not move toward it. "What does it say?" he asked. "They are asking, in formal language, whether I have caused any complications." Silence. He crossed to the table. He picked up the envelope. He opened it and read it, which did not take long, and then he set it down on the table between them, and put both hands flat on the wood on either side of it, and looked at it for a moment. She watched his face. The stillness was there, but underneath it, in the set of his jaw, and the slight tension around his eyes, she could see something that was very close to the edge of something else. "They knew you had found the transit records," he said. "Not a question. Before they sent you here." "I believe so," she said. "Gordon Vane. He was the one I told," she said. "When he told me I had made an error, I thought he was dismissing me. I think now he was scared." "He should be scared," Calum said, and the quietness of his voice made it carry further than shouting would have. He straightened. He looked out the window for a moment. The inner courtyard, the old tree. "I made an error of my own," he said. She waited. "When I demanded tribute from Crescent Ridge, I was not thinking about what they would send," he said. "I was thinking about the border dispute. The transit point arrangement was something I suspected but could not prove. I thought the tribute demand would force them to negotiate in good faith rather than sending someone." He paused. "I was wrong about that. They sent someone, and they chose very carefully who to send." She looked at him. "You did not expect them to comply." "No," he said. "I expected them to come to the table. They sent you instead, which solved their problem with you, and also gave them the appearance of compliance." He looked at the letter. "And then they wrote this." "To check on their problem," she said. "Yes." She was quiet. He was quiet. The letter lay between them on the table. "What will you write back?" she asked. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "I had not decided," he said. "Before today. And now?" He picked up the letter and held it for a moment. Then he set it aside, face down, as if removing it from the conversation. "Now I know what I am writing back," he said. "But I need to finish the southwestern border analysis first. What you wrote yesterday changed my understanding of how deep the Morrow's Run connection goes. Before I make any declaration about Crescent Ridge, I need to understand whether Crescent Ridge and Morrow's Run are operating independently or whether there is a shared arrangement." She looked at him. "You think they may be connected?" "I think the same person who told Crescent Ridge to send you here may also have an interest in what Morrow's Run is doing at the transit points," he said. "And if that is the case, then the letter from Gordon Vane is not just Crescent Ridge covering its position. It is also someone else checking on an investment." She sat down. He sat down across from her. Outside, the wind was up again, the kind that came off the northern high ground and carried a cold edge even in the middle hours. She could hear it against the stone. The fire was low, and he reached past the arm of his chair and added a piece of wood without breaking his attention from the table. "Tell me what you know about the Morrow's Run Alpha," he said. "Very little," she said. "His name is in the transit records only as a signatory authority, Owen Hatch. He came to the position," she thought, 7 years ago, 1 year before you took Iron Hollow." "Yes," Calum said. "Do you know him?" "I have met him twice at formal territory summits," he said. "He is careful, he speaks very little, he listens very well." He paused. "He is the kind of person whose opinion of you is always formed before the room knows he has one." She thought about this. "He sounds like someone who would find the transit point arrangement useful," she said. "It is exactly the kind of thing a careful listener builds, slowly, through others, without leaving a clear line back to himself." Calum looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That is what I think." "Then the Crescent Ridge letter is not just about me," she said. "No," he said. "It is also a signal to you that the thing you have been building against them is being watched." "Yes," he said. "They are letting me know they are watching." "Or," she said, "they are letting you know that someone more interesting than them is watching." He was quiet for a long moment. She picked up the pen that was lying on the corner of the table. She had started doing this, picking up the nearest pen when she was thinking, because it helped, and held it between both hands. "The Morrow's Run letter that arrived this morning," she said. He nodded. "Can I read it?" she said. He pulled the correspondence stack from the side table and found the letter and set it in front of her. She read it. It was short, formally worded. It congratulated Iron Hollow on the resolution of the Crescent Ridge border situation and expressed Morrow's Run's ongoing interest in peaceful regional relations. It mentioned, in the 4th paragraph, that the southern checkpoint would be available for joint inspection at any time Iron Hollow wished to arrange one. She read the 4th paragraph twice. "He is offering you an inspection," she said. "Yes." "Of the checkpoint where Bennett Oaks works." "Yes." "Which means either he does not know you have identified Oaks," she said, "or he knows you have identified Oaks and he is offering the inspection because he believes Oaks can pass it." "Or," Calum said, "he is offering the inspection because he wants to see what I know." She looked up. "He wants to know what I told you." "He wants to know what you know," Calum said. "If Crescent Ridge told him about you, about the records you had access to, Then Owen Hatch received a very concerning piece of news at the same time they sent you here. He has been trying to assess the damage ever since. She set the letter down. How many people know I am here? She said. In general terms, the tribute is public knowledge, he said. The specifics of who you are and what you know, that is a shorter list. But not a short enough list. No, he said, not short enough. She thought. The formal record I am writing, she said. The border analysis. Who will have access to it? Me, he said, and whoever I choose to show it to. Who do you trust with it? He looked at her. The question had a texture she had not quite used with him before. Direct, not accusatory, but pointing at something they had not yet said directly. Who do you trust? In this fortress, after 6 years of building something alone. He was quiet for a moment. Senna, he said. In terms of the household, he paused. In terms of counsel, fewer than I would like. Aldrich Walsh, she said. No. Not even to manage him? Especially not to manage him, he said. Walsh is patient and connected, and has been in this position for 11 years. Giving him information to manage is giving him information to use. I do not confuse those things. She nodded. How long have you known about Walsh's alignment? She asked. Since the 2nd year, he said. He is careful. He does not act. He creates atmospheres. He looked out the window. He was the one who told the senior staff, when I first took leadership, that my approach was experimental. He paused on the word, as if it still carried some echo of the way it had been said. He has been describing it as experimental ever since, not challenging it, just framing it as temporary, something that will eventually resolve itself back to the established way. And you have let him continue, she said. Because removing him would have been exactly what he told people I would do, Calum said. He spent my first year positioning himself as the institutional memory of the old leadership. If I removed him, I proved his point. So I did not remove him. I worked around him, and I waited. For what? She said. He looked at her. For something that changed the balance, he said. Some piece of information, or some development, that shifted the calculation enough that his value as an institutional resource was outweighed by the risk of keeping him. She looked at him. I see, she said. He said nothing. And then I arrived, she said. Yes, he said. And then you arrived. She set the pen down. She put both hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized from watching him, because she had apparently picked it up. The Morrow's Run letter, she said. The Crescent Ridge letter. Walsh's meeting yesterday. These are not separate things. No, he said. They are not. Someone told Morrow's Run's Alpha to write to you now, she said. At the same time Crescent Ridge sent their letter. At the same time Walsh is meeting with the old guard. She paused. Someone coordinated this. Yes, he said. And that someone knew that a tribute had arrived from Crescent Ridge, and that the tribute was significant, she said. Which means the coordination happened from inside this fortress. He looked at her. Yes, he said quietly. That is what I think. Outside, the wind pressed again against the stone. The fire had caught properly now, the new piece of wood burning evenly. On the table between them were 2 letters from 2 different packs, arriving on the same morning, and a 12-page border record that had been written overnight by a girl who was supposed to have disappeared. All right, Nara said. She picked up the pen. Then we need to be faster than they are expecting, she said. Tell me everything you know about Aldrich Walsh's communication history over the past 6 months. He reached for the correspondence stack. They worked through the afternoon and into the early evening, and nobody interrupted them, and the fire burned steadily, and outside Iron Hollow, the wind moved across the old stones in the flagged courtyard, and the single old tree that grew toward the south-facing wall, and the fortress held its breath around 2 people who were building something it did not yet have a name for. Nara did not decide to walk into the council room. The decision made itself the way things did when you had finished thinking, and arrived at the place where thought becomes action, and the space between knowing and doing collapses. She had been in the archive room for 3 days. She had finished the formal record, 24 pages total, precise, sourced, cross-referenced. She had begun a second document beside it, this one more speculative, the connection map. arrows between names, timelines, 3 different colored inks for 3 levels of certainty. It covered both sides of 6 sheets of paper and was expanding onto a 7th. On the morning of the 4th day, she had found the final piece. It was in a consignment record from 4 years prior, bundled into the back of a filing cabinet in the archive room that Calvin had organized but not yet fully cataloged. A single transport authorization for a delivery from the southern checkpoint of Morrow's Run to a distribution point outside the declared Crescent Ridge border. The authorization had 2 signatures. One was Bennett Oaks. The other was a signatory she had not seen in the records before, in the same neat hand she had seen on certain Iron Hollow correspondence. Not Senna's, not Calum's, not Calvin's. She had pulled every piece of correspondence she had access to from the past 5 years and matched the handwriting. 2 matches. Both signed by the same Iron Hollow official, one approving an irregular boundary survey that had never been formally submitted to the territorial record, one acknowledging receipt of a communication from Morrow's Run 2 years ago that should have been flagged to the Alpha King's desk and had not been. Both signed by Aldrich Walsh. She sat in the archive room with the connection map in front of her and looked at the name in the middle of it, which she had written 3 days ago as a possibility, and which was now a documented fact, and she thought about a patient man who created atmospheres and waited, and about 11 years of institutional memory in service of something other than what it claimed to serve. She thought about Calum in the northern wing every night, working on a fortress he was trying to rebuild from the inside, while the man who had served his father sat 2 corridors away and moved pieces in a different direction. She gathered the papers. She walked to the north wing. He was not in the map room, the guard told her, with the minimal economy of expression she had come to associate with guards who had served a long time, that the Alpha King was in the council room with the senior staff. She stood in the corridor. The council room, senior staff. A scheduled meeting he had not canceled this week, which meant he had decided the meeting needed to happen, which meant he had not yet seen what she had found this morning, which meant he was sitting in that room with Aldrich Walsh and the old guard, and she had information that changed everything, and it was in her hands. She walked to the council room. She knocked once and opened the door. The room held 7 people. Calum at the head of the long table. Senna at the far corner with her scheduling book. 4 senior staff members she recognized by now, by face and function, the outer guard rotation, the alliance's correspondence, the lower stores, and, at Calum's right hand, Aldrich Walsh. Walsh was 60 or so, with the kind of face that was always composed, always reading forward to the next move. He looked up when the door opened with the controlled surprise of someone who had already processed the interruption before his expression acknowledged it. Calum looked at her. The room looked at her. She crossed to the table and set the papers in front of Calum, without looking at anyone else. She said, to him directly, "I have a task review that is time-sensitive. I apologize for the interruption." He looked at the papers. He looked at her face. He was very quick at reading her face now. She had noticed this, the way his attention parsed her expression in the first second, and then moved to the next layer. She kept her face neutral except for one thing, which was the steadiness with which she held his gaze, which said, "This is important. Now." He picked up the connection map. He looked at the first page. He turned to the second. He went still, in the way she had learned meant the information had arrived, and was reorganizing everything around it. He looked at the name in the middle. He did not look at Aldrich Walsh. That restraint, the specific, deliberate restraint of a man who has just read something that explains the past 3 years and is not reacting before he has decided how to react, was the most controlled thing she had ever seen. "Thank you," he said. "I will come to you when this meeting concludes." "Of course," she said. She walked out and closed the door behind her. In the corridor she stood for a moment and breathed. Not from fear, from the release of doing the thing. She had walked through a room where she was not supposed to be, without permission, and put a piece of paper in front of the person who needed it, and the person who needed it had received it, with exactly the steadiness she had been counting on. She walked back to the archive room. She sat down. She began writing the 7th page of the connection map. 20 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the corridor that she recognized by now. The particular even pace, not hurrying, never hurrying, and then Calum appeared in the doorway. He came in. He closed the door. He set the connection map on the table between them and looked at it. "Walsh," he said. The handwriting matches on 2 documents, she said. I photographed them in my notes on pages 11 and 14. The first is the boundary survey authorization from 3 years ago. The second is the Morrow's Run receipt acknowledgement. The boundary survey, he said. I remember that survey. It was presented to me as a routine internal review. It was used to establish a reference point for the transit fee calculation, she said. If the boundary survey places a certain landmark inside Crescent Ridge's declared territory, rather than in the disputed zone, the transit fee is technically valid. The survey made the arrangement look legitimate on paper. He looked at the name on the map. He built the mechanism, Calum said, over years, using the institutional access that comes with being senior beta counsel. And then waited for someone outside the fortress to use it, she said. He did not need to manage the external relationship himself. He only needed to ensure that the information he passed out, and the approvals he quietly gave, created a structure that served other people's interests. In exchange for what? Calum said. I do not know yet, she said, but I have a strong hypothesis. She turned to page 19 of the formal record. The boundary survey establishes Walsh's land claim on the disputed parcel at the southeastern edge of Iron Hollow's declared territory, as definitively inside the Pact's borders. Before the survey, it was contested. After the survey, it is his, on paper. He gave other people a mechanism to profit from, and he received a property claim in return. Silence. He looked at page 19 for a long time. In the council room, she said carefully, when I came in, did he know I had found something? He suspected you had found something the moment you walked in, Calum said. Walsh reads situations before they resolve. That is his skill. He looked up. He is good at it. Yes, she said, but he has spent 11 years reading a fortress that was working to a certain set of assumptions. The assumption that what I know about the grain records is limited to what I told you in the first briefing. The assumption that the archive has been searched and is not producing further material. The assumption that, she paused, that you are a tribute, he said, not an investigator. Yes, she said. He does not know what he is looking at. Calum sat down. He looked at the connection map. What do you need to complete this? He said. One more record, she said. The Morrow's Run transit fee schedule, which should be in the lower store's records, under Interpack commercial agreements. Old Fenwick manages those. Fenwick was in the meeting this morning, Calum said. I know, she said. That is a problem. He will tell Walsh you asked for it. Yes, she said, unless someone else pulls the record first. She looked at him. Calvin has access to the lower store's archive. Calvin is not senior staff. No, she said, which means he was not in this morning's meeting. He looked at her for a moment. You want me to ask Calvin to pull the record without going through Fenwick? I want you to decide whether that is appropriate, she said. It is your household. He sat with it for a moment. Yes, he said. I will ask Calvin. He stood. He picked up the connection map. I need to consider the next step carefully, he said. What I have here is enough to act on, but the way I act on it determines what happens to the entire Southwestern Alliance structure. If I move against Walsh without understanding the full extent of what he has built, I will break things I cannot immediately rebuild. I know, she said. That is why I kept writing. He held the map. He looked at her. How long will the 7th page take? He said. 2 hours, she said. If Calvin can get me the transit fee schedule today. I will send him now, he said. He moved to leave. At the door he paused. The council meeting, he said, when you came in. She looked at him. Walsh was watching me read the page with his name on it, he said. He knows I know something. He does not know what. He will act on that uncertainty tonight. What will he do? She said. He will review what he thinks is exposed, Calum said. He will begin removing things from the record, or redirecting them. He paused. He will reach out to his external contacts. The Morrow's Run correspondence goes through the East Post, she said. Calvin does the mail runs. He looked at her. Yes, he said. She said nothing further. He looked at the door and then back at her, and something passed across his face that was, she thought, a kind of recognition, not of her specifically, but of the particular quality of the situation, of two people who think the same way, arriving at the same conclusion, from the same evidence, at the same speed. "I will speak to Calvin about the mail," he said. He left. She turned back to the archive table. She found the 7th sheet of paper, and uncapped the pen, and began writing. And the words came quickly, because the picture was almost complete, and complete pictures write themselves, once you have held all the pieces long enough to see where they belong. Outside the archive room, the fortress was moving through its afternoon. She could hear it: footsteps, the kitchen sounds, the low conversation of people doing the ordinary work that held a place together. She had been here less than 2 weeks, and she knew the sounds of it the way you know the sounds of any place, once you have decided to pay attention. She was paying attention. The 7th page was done in less than 2 hours. Calvin arrived with the transit fee schedule 30 minutes before she finished, setting it on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had not asked why he was pulling it, and had decided not to need to know. She thanked him. He nodded, and went back to his maps. She read the fee schedule. She found the entry on the 2nd page, 3rd column, in the year that matched the boundary survey. She wrote it on the 7th page in the appropriate place. She put the pen down. She sat back and looked at the completed connection map. It was a picture of something that had been built very slowly and very patiently, over 11 years, by a man who understood that the most durable power is the kind that is never claimed directly. Walsh had not stolen anything. He had not forged anything. He had created conditions. He had signed things that could be read as routine. He had passed information that could be called general. He had built a structure that served other interests and received a land claim in return. All of it in the language of ordinary institutional management. All of it invisible, unless you happen to have access to a grain record from a minor PAC's Southern Ledger from 3 years ago. Unless you happen to have been trying very hard to not be disposed of. She gathered the 7 pages, and the formal 24-page record, and the documentation from pages 11 and 14, and the transit fee schedule, and stacked them in order. She walked to the northern wing. She knocked. She went in. He was at the map table. The cold coffee was there. There was a 2nd cup. She set everything on the table. He looked at it. He looked at her. "It is complete," she said. He picked up the stack and began reading from the 1st page, and she sat down across from him and waited, and the fire burned and the wind was up outside and the fortress made its sounds around them, and in the silence between them something settled, that neither of them named but that was there, clearly, as present as anything else in the room. She had arrived here 2 weeks ago in a cart, with a bag that held a coat and a knife and a book of remedies, and a pair of wool socks. She had arrived with no allies and no role, and no reason to expect anything except what the stories had promised, which was a man shaped by fear and a fortress built on it. What she had found instead was a man building something different in the space left by his father's failure, slowly, alone, carrying the weight of it without telling anyone how heavy it was. What she had found was a picture that needed completing. She had completed it. He finished the last page. He set it down. He looked at the fire for a long moment. "Walsh will move tonight," he said. "Yes," she said. "I need to move first." He looked at the stack of papers. "In the morning, I will call a senior staff meeting. I will present this. Walsh will be there. He will deny it," she said. "He will try," Calum said. "But the documentation is on the record, and the witnesses are the paper itself." He paused. "He cannot argue with what he signed." "What happens to him?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "He will be removed from the position," he said. "The property claim will be voided. The boundary survey was produced to serve a corrupt process, which makes it invalid. He will be offered retirement, with the condition that he does not engage in any external communication about Iron Hollow's internal affairs." "You will not force him out of the territory?" "I will not," he said, "because forcing him out creates a grievance and a motive. Retiring him, treating it as an institutional matter rather than a personal one, removes both." He looked at her. "He is old. He is tired. He built this over 11 years because he believed in something he no longer had the power to maintain directly. He will accept the retirement because the alternative is the documentation being formally submitted to the Territorial Council, which would mean the external relationship with Morrow's Run becomes officially contested." "He will not want that," she said. "No," Calum said, "he will not." She thought about a man who had waited 11 years and had run out of time. "When you present it to the senior staff," she said, "will you tell them I found it?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I will tell them exactly what happened." She looked at the table, at the 24-page record, and the 7-page map, and the documentation on pages 11 and 14, and the transit fee schedule from the lower stores. "They will have to recalibrate what they think I am," she said. "Yes," he said. "That will be uncomfortable for some of them." "Yes," he said. "It will." She looked up. He was watching her with the steady attention that she had stopped finding disconcerting, because she had learned what it was. Not evaluation, not calculation, but genuine attention, the kind that was actually looking. "It was uncomfortable for me," he said, quietly, "when I understood what you were." She looked at him. "I had made certain assumptions," he said, "about what they had sent and why. I was angry about those assumptions. And then you walked into the council room and put a paper on the table, and the assumptions stopped being the point." She was quiet. "What are you going to do about Morrow's run?" she said. "Decline the inspection offer," he said, "in writing, with the formal language that makes clear I am not interested in a joint review at this time." He paused. "And submit a competing boundary survey of the southeastern parcels to the Territorial Council, which will take the Walsh survey off the record and return the land classification to disputed. Owen Hatch will know you have found something," she said. "Yes," he said. "He will know I have found it. He will not know how much I have found or how I found it, and he will spend the next several months trying to determine that, which will keep him occupied and cautious, and very unlikely to move against anything in the southwestern corridor." She thought about this. "And Crescent Ridge?" she said. He looked at her. "That one," he said, "I have been thinking about since the morning Senna brought me their letter." He was quiet for a moment. What Gordon Vane and the Elder Council did was not a military or territorial act. It was a personal one. They did something to a person using pack authority as cover. He paused. "The appropriate response is not a military or territorial one." She waited. He looked at the fire. "I am going to write to them," he said. "Formally, on behalf of this household. I am going to inform them that the tribute they sent has been received and has proved significantly more valuable than they intended." He paused on the word with the same slight precision she had started to recognize as his form of emphasis. "And that Iron Hollow considers the matter of the southern transit points to be an open question, with documentation, and that I will be seeking the full Territorial Council's review of the Crescent Ridge Elder Council's management of the arrangement." She looked at him. "That will terrify Gordon Vane," she said. "Yes," he said, "it will. He will know I provided the information." "Yes," he said, "he will know. And he will also know that removing you from the pack, which he thought he was doing, resulted in that information arriving at a desk that is very well positioned to do something with it." He looked at her. "There is no version of their decision that looks correct in retrospect." She sat with this for a moment. Outside the window, the inner courtyard was dark. The old tree was a shape against the darker stone of the far wall. A single torch burned against the outer gate, the way it always did, the way she had learned it always did. "They will not come for me?" she said. "They have no grounds," he said. "A tribute, once received, is the business of the receiving household. They have no standing in Iron Hollow. The Territorial Council would not hear it." He paused. "And the moment I submit the transit documentation, their attention will be elsewhere." She nodded. She looked at the completed stack of papers on the table. She thought about the cloth bag with the dried herbs at the bottom of the mud. She thought about Gordon Vane and the floorboards. She thought about Owen's cart and the dark forest without a name on the pack maps. She thought about the first night in this room, and the chair against the door, and the knife on the mattress. She thought about a second cup of coffee appearing beside her hand. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "What happens now?" he said. She looked at the papers, at everything they had built in 4 days of work together, at the picture that had come together from a grain record, and a cabinet with a sticking hinge, and a book of plant medicines, and a mind that had been trained by 3 years of having nowhere to go but toward what was true. "Now I go to the archive room," she said, "and I start on the Morrow's Run history. Because if Owen Hatch has been at this for 7 years, there is more in the record than one transit arrangement, and I want to find it before he has time to think about what I might find." He was quiet for a moment. "In the morning," he said. "The archive will still be there in the morning." She looked at him. "You have not eaten since breakfast," he said. She had not, in fact, noticed this. She noticed it now. "There are still things in the kitchen," he said. "Hester leaves things out." She stood. She gathered her coat. She thought about the cabinet with the sticking hinge, and whether Calvin had told the steward again, and whether the steward had sent someone, and whether it mattered right now. "Walsh will reach out to his contacts tonight," she said. "I will intercept the correspondence," he said. "Calvin has already been spoken to." She nodded. She walked to the door. "Nara," he said. She stopped. She turned. He looked at her with the gray-green steady regard that she had stopped misreading 3 days ago, when she had finally placed what it contained. Not evaluation, not distance, not the managed stillness of a man holding himself together. Something that was more plainly, more simply, the expression of a person who is looking at something they did not expect to have, and have not yet decided how to hold. "The archive will be there in the morning," he said. "What you have already built will still be there. You do not have to carry it through the night." She stood at the door for a moment. Then she said, "I know." She meant it. She went to find Hester's kitchen, and she ate what was there, and the fire in the east wing hearth was warm, and the fortress made its sounds around her, and she filed them as she always filed things, not for keeping, just for knowing, because knowing where you are is the first condition of everything else. In the morning, the archive would be there, and so would she. The morning that Aldrich Walsh's removal was made formal did not announce itself the way endings usually do. There was no particular weather, no gathering of clouds or shift in the light. The inner courtyard was the same as every other morning, the servants' crossing, the old tree leaning south, a guard completing a rotation at the outer gate, with the same measured pace he always kept. Nara was in the archive room when Senna came to tell her the senior staff meeting had been called for the 8th hour. She was on her second cup of tea, working through the morrow's run history, and the news did not interrupt the work so much as settle alongside it. "He will be presenting the documentation," Senna said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nara said. Senna stood in the doorway for a moment. Her face, always composed, had a quality this morning that Nara had not seen in it before, a kind of held-breath anticipation that was not anxiety exactly, but was very close to it. "Are you concerned?" Nara asked. "I am. Careful," Senna said. "Walsh has been in this position for 11 years. Removing him changes the structure of the household, changes the balance." She looked at Nara. "Some of the senior staff have relied on him as the established voice, the continuity. The person who knows how things were done before," Nara said. "Yes. And once he is gone, that position needs to be filled by someone who knows how things are being done now," Nara said. Senna looked at her. "Yes," she said quietly. "You have been here 11 years, Nara said. Senna was very still for a moment. Then she said, "That is a conversation for another time." She left. Nara turned back to the morrow's run history. She had found, in the 3rd year of Owen Hatch's tenure as Alpha, a set of correspondence records that suggested the transit arrangement at the southern checkpoint was not the first of its kind. There had been an earlier version, smaller, less formalized, that had operated for 2 years before being quietly dissolved when the Territorial Council commissioned a routine review of interpack commercial agreements. The earlier version had involved a third party, a merchant family from the eastern edge of Crescent Ridge's territory, whose transport business had benefited from irregular checkpoint clearances. She made a note. She turned the page. The merchant family's name appeared again 3 records later, this time as signatories on a land transaction, a parcel in the southeastern edge of Crescent Ridge, the same general area as the contested boundary. The family name was Oaks. She set down her pen. Not Oaks. Oaks. But close enough that she looked more carefully. Bennett Oaks, of the Morrow's Run Southern Checkpoint. The Oaks family of the Eastern Crescent Ridge merchant trade. She turned back through the records, cross-referencing, the way she had learned to cross-reference, not looking for confirmation, but looking for the edge of the picture. She found it on the 5th record back, a consignment note, 6 years old, signed by Bennett Oaks and countersigned by the head of the Oaks family transport business. She checked the date. 6 years ago. The first year of Calum Voss's leadership of Iron Hollow. The first year of Owen Hatch's leadership of Morrow's Run. She sat with this for a long moment. Not a coincidence. A system, built in the first year of 2 new leaderships, by 2 people with family connections and access to checkpoints on opposite sides of a disputed corridor. Built while 2 new alphas were finding their footing. Built in the gaps. She picked up her pen. She wrote very fast. The 8th hour came and went. She could hear, distantly, the sound of the council room. Not words, just the texture of a meeting. She kept writing. Calvin brought her tea at some point, and she thanked him, and he left, and she kept going. At the 9th hour and 20 minutes, the meeting sound changed. She was good enough at the sounds of this place now to hear the difference, a particular quality of silence that meant something had concluded, something with weight. Then footsteps in the corridor, multiple sets, dispersing in different directions. The meeting was over. 10 minutes later, Calum came to the archive room. He came in and closed the door. He sat down in the chair across from her. He looked at her work on the table. "How much have you found?" he said. "Enough," she said. She passed him the page with the Oaks connection. The Oaks at the checkpoint and the Oaks in the Crescent Ridge merchant trade are the same family. The arrangement is older and wider than either letter suggested. He read the page. He set it down. "Walsh," she said. "Gone," he said. He accepted the retirement terms before I finished presenting the documentation. He did not look at the papers directly. He paused. He knew before I began. "He knew last night," she said, when he reached out to his contacts, and Calvin intercepted the correspondence. "Yes," Calum said. He knew. He was preparing to argue. When I set the documentation on the table, he read the first 2 pages, and stopped. He was quiet. He looked at me, and said he had served this fortress with the belief that the old way was the right way, and that he had been waiting for me to recognize it. He paused. He was not apologizing. He was explaining. "What did you say?" she said. "I told him I understood what he believed," Calum said, "that the old way had produced a certain kind of order, and he had valued that order, and that what I was building was a different kind of order, and that I was not asking him to value it, but that I was requiring him to stop working against it." She looked at him. "He asked whether I intended to damage his reputation," Calum said. "I told him his reputation was his own, and I had no interest in managing it. I told him the property claim would be voided and the boundary survey withdrawn, and that the documentation would remain in the Iron Hollow record, but would not be submitted to the Territorial Council provided he kept his conditions." "He agreed," she said. "He agreed," Calum said. "He is packing his rooms today. He will leave by the end of the week." The archive room was quiet. She looked at the papers on the table, the 7-page connection map, the Oaks consignment note, the new pages of Morrow's Run history spreading out from the earlier work. "The senior staff," she said. "How did they receive it?" "Differently," he said. Graves was not surprised. He had suspected something for some time, but had not had the documentation. Marion Keel was very still and very quiet, and I believe she is still working out what it means for the Alliance's correspondence she has been managing, under assumptions that were partly incorrect. Fenwick was relieved, I think, in the way people are relieved when a pressure they had adapted to is removed, and they can stop adapting. "And the meeting itself?" she said. "When I walked in yesterday." He looked at her. "That," he said, "changed everything, before the documentation was even read." She waited. "Walsh's position in that room depended on a certain assumption," he said, "that he was the most informed person present, the person who knew the most, who had been here the longest, whose understanding of the situation was the most complete." He paused. "When you walked in and set papers on the table that I clearly recognized as significant, and when I responded to them with the attention I gave them, that assumption ended. Before anyone read a word." She understood what he was saying. He was not afraid of the documentation, she said. He was afraid of what the documentation represented, Calum said. That there was a source of information in this fortress that he had not accounted for. That the picture he had been managing was incomplete in a direction he had not predicted. She thought about a patient man who built things over 11 years and did not account for a girl with a grain record. "The Oaks family," she said. "What will you do with them?" "The merchant transport business will be flagged for the next Territorial Council review," he said. "The The land transaction from 6 years ago will be submitted to the Disputed Properties Register. It is not enough to act on yet. The connection requires more documentation before I can make a formal claim. He looked at her work on the table. How many more records do you think are in here? At least 2 more years of material, she said. Possibly 3. The earlier arrangement, before the transit fee structure was formalized, ran through a different channel. I think there is a property record in the lower stores that ties the Oakes family to the original arrangement, but I have not found it yet. He was quiet for a moment. Fenwick is relieved, she said. You said that. Yes. Which means he was aware of something he was uncomfortable with and had not acted on, she said. Which means the property record I am looking for may be something Fenwick encountered and did not know what to do about. Yes, he said. Can I speak to him? Today, if you want. She nodded. After lunch, she said. Approaching him in the morning feels like an interrogation. After lunch is a conversation. He looked at her for a moment. You are very precise about the difference, he said. The difference matters, she said. Fenwick cooperated with something he was not comfortable with, because the structure around him made refusal feel riskier than compliance. If I approach him like an investigator, he will close. If I approach him like a colleague, he will tell me what he knows, because he has been waiting for someone to ask. Calum was quiet. How do you know that? He said. She looked at the papers on the table. Because that is what I spent 2 years doing in Crescent Ridge, she said. Cooperating with things I was not comfortable with, because the structure made refusal feel riskier than compliance. She did not look up, until the moment I decided the calculation had changed. He was very still. She moved to the next page. Fenwick was in the lower stores after lunch, exactly where she expected him to be, doing the thing he always did at this hour, by the evidence of the worn chair and the familiar arrangement of the lamp, going over the week's supply records. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. He was 70, or close to it. Thin, with careful eyes behind plain spectacles, and the particular posture of a man who had been bending over records for 40 years. He had the look of someone who had just put down a very heavy thing and was still deciding whether to feel relieved or simply empty. I am looking for a property record from about 7 years ago, she said. A land transaction involving the southeastern border parcels. I believe it may have passed through the lower store's archive because of its commercial classification. Fenwick looked at her for a moment. He stood up. He went to the third cabinet from the left, not the sticking one. That was in the archive room 2 floors up, but a different third cabinet, and he opened it, and looked for a moment, and then pulled out a file. He held it out to her. She took it. I have known it was there for 5 years, he said. I did not know who to give it to. She looked at him. You could have given it to the Alpha King, she said. I was not certain who the Alpha King trusted, Fenwick said, and I was not certain whether presenting him with a problem would make me part of the problem. She thought about this. That is a reasonable concern, she said. Things are clearer now, he said. He sat back down. I am glad they are clearer. She opened the file. She read the first page. She took a breath. Thank you, she said. He nodded and turned back to his supply records. She went back to the archive room and sat down and read the file from beginning to end, and then read it again, and by the time she finished, she had the complete picture. Not a hypothesis, not a cross-reference, not a connection that required more documentation. The complete picture. The property record tied the Oakes family transport business to an original land transaction in the southeastern border parcel that predated the Walsh boundary survey by 2 years, which meant the survey had not created the claim. It had formalized one that already existed, which meant Walsh had not built the structure. He had been brought into an existing one, which changed everything. She was still sitting with this when Calum appeared in the doorway. He looked at her face and came in and sat down. She pushed the file across the table. He read it. He read the first page and stopped. He looked at her. She said nothing. He read the rest. When he finished, he set it down very carefully on the table. He looked at the connection map. He looked at the 7 pages. He looked at the file. Walsh was not the architect, he said. No, she said. He was a participant, a useful one, but the structure was built before he was part of it. Then someone else built it, he said. Someone who had access to the southeastern border parcels, had a connection to the Oakes family, and had an interest in a formal property claim on the disputed land. 2 years before Walsh's survey. He paused. Before I took leadership. During your father's last 2 years, she said. He was very quiet. Yes, he said. She waited. I do not have a name, she said. Not yet. The file lists the transaction party as a corporate registration. It will take more work to trace the registration back to an individual. He looked at the file. But the registration jurisdiction, she said, is not Crescent Ridge. It is not Morrow's Run. It is a third-party registration, out of the Eastern District. He looked up. Which third-party jurisdiction? She turned the file to the relevant page and pointed. He read the name. He sat back. She watched his face. She watched the stillness, which was there as always, and she watched the thing underneath it, which was rearranging itself around a new piece of information that was changing the shape of everything. You know that registration, she said. Yes, he said. I know it. She waited. It is my father's, he said. The archive room was very quiet. She looked at the connection map on the table, at the name she had written in the center of it, which was Walsh's, and at the empty space above it where the name she had not yet been able to find would go. He built it, she said, quietly, not asking. He built a great many things, Calum said, that I did not know about. He looked at the file. He built them because he could, and because the structure of the pack at the time meant there was no one watching. He paused, and then he died. And the things he built did not die with him. They kept running. Walsh knew about the original structure, she said. He was in the senior council when your father was alive. He saw it being built, and when you took leadership and changed the direction of the fortress, he began maintaining the structure on behalf of the continuation of what your father intended. Yes, Calum said. She thought about the books in the reading room, the older handwriting and the newer one, the argument in the margins that had been going on for 6 years. She thought about, this is how cruelty hides, written in a young man's hand on a page his father had filled. The Territorial Council review, she said, the full submission. If we include this file, the original transaction, it will put your father's name in the record. He was quiet. It will make the investigation public, she said. And it will complicate the question of how long the arrangement has been running, and whether Iron Hollow, under the previous leadership, was complicit. Yes, he said. What do you want to do? She said. He looked at the table for a long time. At the file. At the connection map. At the fire. Submit it, he said. She looked at him. All of it, he said. The original transaction. The continuation under Walsh. The Oakes family transport records. The Morrow's Run transit arrangements. All of it. He met her eyes. I cannot submit part of it. If I submit part of it, the part I withheld will surface eventually, and when it does, it will look like a cover. It will look like I knew and chose to hide it. He paused. I will not do what my father did, which is build things in the dark, and wait for them to run themselves. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I will write the submission document. He nodded. It will take me 3 days, she said, if you want it done properly. Do it properly, he said. She picked up her pen. He reached across and poured her a second cup of tea from the pot Calvin had left, which she had not gotten to yet, and set it beside her hand. He picked up the file. I will start on the formal response to Morrow's Run, he said. Tell them you are declining the joint inspection, she said, not looking up. Yes, he said. And tell them, she said, still not looking up, that Iron Hollow is in the process of submitting a territorial review of certain commercial arrangements in the southeastern corridor, which will require their cooperation in providing relevant records. A pause. That will tell Owen Hatch exactly where we are, he said. Good, she said. Let him spend the next 3 weeks preparing for a review, instead of preparing for anything else. Silence. You are very good at this, he said. She looked up. I spent 2 years doing grain records for a pack that was hiding something, she said. I got a lot of practice at noticing what was being kept from view. He looked at her, the steady gray-green regard, the thing underneath the stillness that she had been learning to read and was getting better at every day. Yes, he said. You did. She went back to work. He went back to work. Outside the archive room, the fortress moved through the afternoon in its ordinary way, and the old tree in the courtyard leaned south, and the guards kept their 4-hour rotation, and Hester in the laundry sorted the week's linen, and Senna managed the schedule, and Calvin did the afternoon mail run, and came back with nothing unusual, and the window frames that had been replaced 3 winters ago held the cold outside where it belonged. It was an ordinary afternoon in Iron Hollow, except that 3 days of work was sitting on the archive table, and something that had been built in the dark was about to come into the light, and the man who was going to bring it there had decided, quietly, without announcing it, in the flat, direct way he decided everything, that honesty was not the convenient choice, but was the only one he was going to make. She had thought about a great many things when she arrived here with her cloth bag, and her folding knife, and her book of remedies. She had thought about exits. She had thought about distances and timelines and what survival looked like in the short term and the medium term. She had not thought about what it might look like to stop surviving and simply be somewhere. She was starting to think about it now. The formal emissary from Crescent Ridge arrived on a morning when the frost was heavy on the outer walls, and the inner courtyard was sharp-edged with cold. He came with 2 pack escorts and a letter of introduction that Senna received at the gate and read before bringing to the northern wing, where Nara was reviewing the final pages of the territorial submission. His name is Roland Finch, Senna said. He is not one of the Elder Council. He is a pack administrator, the kind they send when they want someone capable but expendable. Gordon Vane would not come himself, Nara said. No, Senna said. He would not. She set the letter on the table. Nara read it. It was exactly as formal as Calum had predicted, when he had told her 3 weeks ago that a formal emissary would come. It expressed, in careful language, the Crescent Ridge Elder Council's continued goodwill toward Iron Hollow, and their sincere interest in the ongoing well-being of all members of the household. It made no mention of tribute. It made no mention of her name. It asked for a meeting at the earliest convenience. She handed the letter to Senna. Tell him this afternoon, she said, in the East Hall, 2 hours after lunch. Senna looked at her. The Alpha King. I will speak to him, Nara said. She brought the letter to Calum at the map table, where he was reviewing the Territorial Council's preliminary acknowledgement of the submission. He read the letter in the way he read everything, quickly, completely, without expression. Finch, he said. I know the name. Mid-level administrative position. He has been in the Crescent Ridge Council offices for 8 years. They chose someone who knows the institutional language, but is not a primary decision-maker, she said. He can report back, but cannot commit to anything. Yes, Calum said, which means they are not here to negotiate, they are here to assess. To see what I have told you, she said. And what you are, he said. Whether you are a person with standing in this household, or whether you are still what they sent. She looked at the letter. 2 hours after lunch, she said, in the East Hall. I will meet with him. He looked at her. Alone? If you are there, it is a statement about power, she said. If I am there alone, it is a statement about something different. What statement? He said. She looked at him. That I am exactly where I choose to be, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Senna will be nearby. Yes, she said. She always is. The East Hall was the plainest large room in the fortress, used for general gatherings, not ceremonies. No particular furniture arrangement that implied hierarchy. She had chosen it for that reason. She arrived 5 minutes before the appointed time, and sat at the end of the long table, and waited. Roland Finch was escorted in by Calvin, who was maintaining the air of helpful normalcy that Nara had come to think of as his particular skill. Finch was perhaps 50, sandy-haired, with a tidy manner and the watchful eyes of someone who had built a career on reading situations before they resolved. He looked at the room, and then at her, and she could see him adjusting. She was not what he had prepared for, which was probably not a girl sitting alone at the end of a table, with the composed attention of someone who had been waiting for him. Miss Fenn, he said, which was incorrect. She had no title, but told her immediately that he had been briefed to treat her with some degree of care. Please sit, she said. Thank you for coming. He sat across from her. Calvin retreated to the doorway. Finch placed his hands on the table, and gave her the practiced professional attention of a man who had conducted many such meetings. "The Council extends its warmest regards to the Iron Hollow household," he said. "Please thank the Council," she said. "We are very glad to hear that you are settled," he said. The word settled carried a particular weight, which she heard and did not respond to directly. "I am," she said. "Thank you." The Elder Council was naturally concerned about the transition, he said. "The arrangement was somewhat sudden. They want to assure you that they acted with your best interests in mind." She looked at him. She kept her expression entirely neutral and said, "I understand." He looked at her. He was reading her. She could feel it. The professional attention parsing her face and her posture and the way she was sitting, looking for the information they had sent him to find. "Is there anything you need?" he said. "Anything the Council could assist with?" "No," she said. "I have everything I need." "Your position here," he said carefully. "It is comfortable?" "It is appropriate," she said. "And the Alpha King," he said, even more carefully, "has been welcoming?" She looked at him for a moment. "The Alpha King," she said, "has given me access to the archive, the reading room, and any resource I require for the work I am doing on his behalf. The household has been—" She thought of Edith, of Hester, of Calvin with the cut hand and the maps, of Senna who came to the reading room to tell her things she needed to know, welcoming in all the ways that matter. He held her gaze. He was very good at holding gazes. "The Council," he said, "would be glad to hear about the nature of your work, if you are comfortable sharing." She looked at him. "I am reviewing Interpack commercial and territorial records for the Alpha King," she said, "specifically pertaining to the southwestern corridor and the southeastern border parcels." She paused for exactly the right amount of time. "As I believe the Council may be aware, there are some interesting historical arrangements in those areas that have not previously received full territorial review." The color in Roland Finch's face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "I see," he said. "The Territorial Council submission will be formally lodged within the week," she said. "I imagine the Crescent Ridge Council has already received preliminary notice of the review. It covers a fairly wide range of arrangements, some of them quite old." She held his gaze. "I am sure the Elder Council's records will be very helpful to the review process." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. "Is there," he said, very carefully, "anything the Elder Council might communicate to the Alpha King on the question of the tribute arrangement?" "The Alpha King," she said, "considers the tribute arrangement to be complete." She paused. The tribute, as he noted in his formal communication to the Council, proved significantly more valuable than anticipated. Finch processed this. She watched him process it. She watched the thing that had been Gordon Vane's plan, the neat, efficient solution to the problem she represented, arrive at its actual destination, which was not a disposal but a reversal. The information they had needed to disappear was now the centerpiece of a territorial review that would require the Crescent Ridge Elder Council's cooperation and documentation for the next several months. He gathered himself with the professional efficiency of someone who has completed a mission and needs to return the report even when the report is not what anyone hoped for. "The Council will be very glad to hear that the household has benefited. Please do convey that," she said. He stood. She stood. He shook her hand with the formal correctness of someone who has revised his assessment of a situation mid-meeting and is choosing not to show it. Calvin walked him out. She sat back down at the long table, and she sat there for a moment in the quiet of the East Hall. She thought about Gordon Vane. She had no particular feeling about him this morning, not anger, not triumph, not the residual grief of someone looking back at what had been done to them. She felt, mostly, the clean, flat clarity of something that has been resolved. The thing they had tried to do was finished, and it had not gone the way they intended, and that was the end of it. He would spend the next several months under the weight of a territorial review, and she would spend the next several months building something she was only beginning to understand the shape of. That was a fair outcome. Senna appeared at the far door. "Well?" Senna said. "Well," Nara said, "he will report back that I am not a problem that has been resolved." She paused. "And that the problem, such as it was, has become significantly more complicated for the people who created it." Senna allowed herself the small smile that she reserved for things that were precisely right. The Alpha King wants to know how it went, Senna said. Tell him it went as expected, Nara said, and that I will be in the archive room. Senna turned to go. Senna, Nara said. She turned back. When Walsh was removed, Nara said, the position of senior counsel. It has not been filled. Senna looked at her. You have been managing the household for 11 years, Nara said. You have been managing the Alpha King's schedule. You have been doing the work of that position without the designation. Senna was very still. That is worth raising with him, Nara said. A moment, a long one. Yes, Senna said quietly. It is. She left. Nara went back to the archive room. She sat down and she looked at the table, the papers, the connection map, the territorial submission, the 7 pages of Morrow's run history, the file from the lower stores, the picture, complete. She thought about what came after complete. What came after complete was not finished. She knew this. The territorial review would take months. The Morrow's run question was not settled. Owen Hatch was patient and connected, and he would not simply stop because a review had been initiated. The Oakes family transport business would need to be traced fully. The corporate registration her father-in-law had used needed to be properly dissolved from the record. There was more work. There was always more work. But she was not a girl in a cart anymore, going somewhere she had not been told about to do something she had not been asked. She was in a room she had earned access to, doing work she had made herself necessary for, in a fortress that had turned out to be nothing like the story she had been given, run by a man who had turned out to be nothing like the story anyone had told about him. She picked up her pen. She was in the middle of the next page when she heard his step in the corridor. She knew it by now the way she knew all the sounds of this place, without having to think. He knocked, which he had started doing 3 weeks ago, though she had never asked him to. Come in, she said. He came in. He looked at the table. He looked at the page she was working on. He sat down in the chair across from her, the one that had become his chair, in the archive room the same way her chair at the end of the breakfast table had become hers, and the corner seat in the reading room had become hers, and the second cup in the map room had become hers. Finch is on his way back, he said. Good, she said. You gave him enough to report without giving him anything he can use, he said. That was the intention, she said. He looked at the page she was working on. The Morrow's Run third-party account, he said. Have you found the second name yet? Almost, she said. I think it is in the Eastern Trade Registry. Calvin is checking. Calvin is becoming an investigator, he said. Calvin was always going to become an investigator, she said. He simply needed someone to give him something worth investigating. Calum was quiet for a moment. She kept writing. When this is done, he said, the submission, the review. When it has moved to the council's hands, what do you want to do next? She looked up. He met her eyes with the direct steadiness she had stopped finding surprising, and had started simply, expecting, counting on, the way you counted on a sound you had learned to know. I want to look at the northern border agreements, she said, the ones with the hill packs. You have not had a formal review of those in 4 years, and from what I have seen in the territorial records, there are at least 2 provisions that should be renegotiated before spring. He looked at her. That is 6 months of work, he said. Yes, she said. Possibly 8. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. She went back to writing. He reached for the correspondence on the corner of the table, the Morrow's Run reply he had been drafting, and he read over what he had written and made a correction in the margin. The fire burned. The frost on the outer walls held. Outside the archive room window, the inner courtyard was sharp and pale in the winter light, and the old tree leaned toward the south-facing wall, and the guards kept their rotation, and the sounds of the fortress, which she knew now, all of them, the way you know a place when you have decided to know it, moved through the stone around them. She did not think about exits. She did not think about the cart, or the dried herbs in the mud, or the chair against the door. She did not think about Gordon Vane or the floorboards, or the gap that had existed for 3 years between what she knew and anyone willing to hear it. She thought about the page in front of her, and the one after that, and the northern border agreements in the spring, and the work that was always there when you were paying real attention. She wrote. He wrote. The second cup on the corner of her table, poured without ceremony, left without comment, went cold, and then was replaced with a warm one, and she did not say thank you, because she did not need to, and he did not say anything, because he did not need to either. And the archive room held them both in the ordinary quiet of two people who had found, without planning for it and without naming it while it was happening, that the most sustaining thing is simply to be somewhere real, with someone who is also being real, and to have enough work between you that neither of you has to perform anything at all. That was what remained, when the story everyone expected had not happened, and the story no one expected had. Not a bond in the ceremonial sense, not the thing the court had waited for on the binding night, or the thing the elder council had tried to arrange, or the thing the stories promised about mad alpha kings and the girls given to them. Something quieter and considerably more durable. Two people who told each other the truth and kept working. That was enough. That was, in the end, more than enough.